Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the gritty, untamed world of early frontiersmen, the kind of folks who wandered off into deep wilderness with little more than a knife, a fire starter, and a death wish. You're going to need every ounce of focus, because we're diving into the forgotten survival skills that kept them alive. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive this. This was a life where reading a tree wrong meant starvation, and trusting the wrong trail could get you eaten. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, what city are you watching from, and what time is it over there? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of a forest that stretches farther than you can see. No paths, no signs, just trees and wind, and the faint possibility of food somewhere beyond the ridge. You squint at the treetops. They lean ever so slightly east, like they're nodding in agreement about something you don't understand yet. But you will. Because out here, if you don't learn to read the land like a book, you will become a footnote in someone else's. The first skill every frontiersman had to master was the art of not getting stupidly, fatally lost. There were no GPS signals, no paper maps, and definitely no friendly ranger stations. Just you, the sky, and the slope of the earth. You start walking, and the wind hits your left cheek first. Good. Easterly. Maybe you're still roughly aligned with the stream you passed earlier, but the real compass here is in the trees. You learn fast that tree branches tend to grow longer on the side that faces the sun, which in the northern hemisphere means south. Moss? Yeah, it tends to gather on the north-facing side of trees, but here's the catch. That's only true in damp, shady spots. Plenty of poor souls have wandered off in circles trusting moss with their lives, and the forest doesn't issue refunds. The ground beneath your feet starts to slope downward. You crouch to examine the soil, richer, damper. That means you're heading into a draw, and likely toward water. You touch a leaf. It's damp on the underside. The humidity rises just slightly, like the air's holding its breath. You follow it, trusting that water means fish, and fish means you might live another day. As you hike, your senses sharpen. You start noticing patterns. Crows gather in groups near disturbed ground. That could mean a recent predator kill, or a human one. The bark on one tree is stripped about 6 feet up, exposing pale inner wood. A bear's been here. You press your fingers to the gouges. Maybe 2 days old. Deep enough to be serious. You don't linger. There's a sound that begins to tune into your awareness. Not just birdsong, but types of birdsong. Some birds sing constantly, until they don't. That sudden silence, that's not random. That's a warning. Something bigger than them just entered the area, and now so have you. You find a slight rise in the ground and climb to the top. It's not much. A hill barely taller than a cabin, but it gives you a clearer view. You spot a ridgeline to the west, heavy with conifers, and lighter woods in the east. If you were smart, and you're becoming smart, you'd aim for that ridge. It offers better cover, better resources, and less competition from game already hunted out of the lower lands. 1 foot after the other, you move. Carefully. Intentionally. You stop often, not because you're tired, though you are, but because you're learning that motion isn't the default here. Observation is. You notice broken branches and realize they're not from wind, but from elk. You see trampled brush and study the angles. Someone passed through here with a cart or sledge, maybe weeks ago, maybe longer. The track dips into a ravine and vanishes. You don't follow it. That's how ghosts are made. You come upon a tree that's been struck by lightning. It's dead now, splintered down the middle, but its remains point roughly northeast, where the storm came from. You make a note in your head. The wind and storms mostly blow from that direction, which means that food-bearing plants will grow thicker on the sheltered side of rocks and logs. It also means that predators, like wolves and cougars, are more likely to bed down in those same protected spaces. Another mental note. The best places to find food are often the same places where you might become food. Now, here's the quirky part. Some frontiersmen, especially the eccentric loners, believed in reading ant hills. No joke. They'd squat beside them, watch which direction the ants were building their entrances, and use that to determine wind patterns or seasonal shifts. Was it scientifically sound? Debatable. But out here, you use every trick you've got, even if it comes from watching bugs with a little too much enthusiasm. And here's where the scholars still debate. Did these skills originate purely from experience, or were some of them inherited from indigenous knowledge? Truth is, the line is blurry. Many frontiersmen learned from native guides, often without credit, and absorbed thousands of years of hard-earned survival knowledge. Others stumbled their way into it after losing companions and nearly starving half to death. Either way, those who didn't learn how to read the land with all their senses simply disappeared. The wilderness is very good at swallowing people. The sun starts to dip, casting long shadows through the trees. Your feet hurt, your hands are scraped from brushing past rough bark. But you feel something new, something primitive in your blood that says, okay, I can do this. You're not just surviving, you're starting to belong. The wind picks up again, curling around your ears like a whisper. East, always east. The first time you set a deadfall trap, you're sure it's going to work. You carve the trigger stick with all the intensity of a man trying to perform surgery using a hatchet. You balance the bait, prop the kill log in place, step back, and bam! It collapses right then and there. No squirrel, no rabbit, just crushed hopes and a broken twig. Welcome to the second survival skill. How to make dinner fall out of the sky without blowing off your own fingers. Deadfall traps are exactly what they sound like. Logs or heavy rocks designed to fall onto an animal when a delicate trigger is nudged. The beauty is that they don't require bullets, rope, or even much metal. Just gravity and patience. Frontiersmen swore by them because they could be set up in batches, worked overnight, and didn't scare off prey with loud noises. They were, in every sense, the lazy hunter's best friend. But building one that actually works, that's where things get tricky. So you start again. This time you're a little more methodical. You whittle a figure 4 trigger, a classic design passed down from the kind of guy who probably hadn't bathed since the War of 1812. 3 sticks, one vertical, one horizontal, one diagonal, all notched perfectly to balance the weight of a killstone. You nestle your bait, maybe a smear of dried berry mush or a scrap of leftover jerky, onto the trigger stick. Then carefully you balance a flat stone the size of a fat raccoon right above it. You back away slowly like you're defusing a bomb. The trap holds. There's a reason this technique stuck around for centuries. It's silent, reusable, and requires nothing but your surroundings. Back in the frontier days, lead was precious, and guns were unreliable. Misfires, rust, rain damage. But rocks always worked. And in places thick with hares, squirrels, or even weasels, a few well-placed deadfalls could keep you alive when your stomach felt like it was trying to eat itself. As dusk creeps in, you circle back to your trap. You're not expecting much, but there it is. A soft rustle, a shuffle, and then snap. Something small. You rush forward. The log has dropped cleanly. Beneath it, a twitching grey body, still for good now. A rabbit. You kneel down, more reverent than you expected, and give a quiet thanks. You didn't grow this. You didn't buy it. You built a machine from sticks and instinct, and it worked. The fire crackles low that night. You cook slowly, rotating the rabbit meat on a spit. The scent makes your mouth water. Smoky, gamey, tinged with pine resin from the firewood. The meat is lean, a little tough, but it fills your belly in a way hardtack never could. You feel the warm glow not just from the fire, but from the success. This wasn't luck. This was skill. And it's a skill that could save your life again and again. Now here's a strange but true frontier twist. Some trappers used mirrors to lure animals into traps. Small polished pieces of metal or glass would catch the sun and attract the curiosity of raccoons, birds, and other creatures drawn to shiny things. A little glint in the right place and snap, dinner caught itself. Quirky? Sure. But if you've ever watched a blue jay try to eat foil, you get the idea. There's also something of a debate among wilderness historians about who actually perfected these traps. Native tribes across North America had used deadfall traps long before Europeans arrived, many with designs more efficient than anything the settlers cooked up. The difference came in the materials: bones, sinew, stone tools. Some scholars argue that the frontiersmen just adapted indigenous technology and gave it a new name. Others claim it was parallel evolution, two desperate cultures solving the same problem with the same natural resources. Either way, the trap didn't care who invented it. It just fell. And the thing is, deadfall traps teach you more than how to eat. They teach you how to wait, how to watch, how to notice which trail animals use at dusk, which rocks have the perfect balance point, which sounds mean something is sniffing the bait. You start to think like prey. You imagine the rustle in the leaves, the pull of hunger, the nudge against the stick. You imagine the weight above. You begin to think in cause and effect, consequence and reward. The next morning you're back at it. You build another and another. You experiment, slant traps, split log traps, double kill setups. You start naming them. Breakfast station, the rock lobster, Jeff. You can't explain why, but giving the traps names makes it feel less lonely out here. But the wilderness doesn't always cooperate. A storm rolls in, knocking one trap flat. Another is sprung, bait gone, no kill. You find tufts of fur but no body. Maybe a fox stole it. Maybe the rabbit crawled off. Maybe nature just flipped you off a little. That's part of the game too. You don't always win. Still, each day you get better. You move quieter. Set more efficient traps. Learn which woods are best for trigger sticks. Willow's good. Pine is terrible. You collect smooth rocks that feel like they're waiting to fall. And every time you eat something that didn't come from a can, you feel like you're reclaiming some ancient skill that modern life tried to delete. Because out here, meat doesn't come from a store. It comes from listening, carving, baiting, waiting, and maybe a little luck, or maybe just gravity. The third day, your hands look like they've been through a bar fight with sandpaper. Blisters have blossomed on your palms, your fingers are streaked with soot and bark, and there's a suspicious splinter under your thumbnail. All because you tried to do something that sounds simple on paper. Make fire from friction. Spoiler alert, it's not simple. It's one of the most brutal, humbling things a person can attempt in the wild. And yet frontiersmen did it routinely, because there wasn't exactly a Zippo in every pocket. Your first attempt begins with optimism, which is a mistake. You craft a bow drill. Classic setup. One stick as a spindle, a flat board with a small divot as the hearth, a shoelace wrapped around the spindle and a curved stick for the bow. Then you twist, grind, and sweat your way into a quiet breakdown. The spindle slips. The bow snags. Smoke teases you but never becomes flame. You keep going until your arms ache and your upper lip shines with fury sweat. The wilderness doesn't care that you're tired. It only rewards results. Eventually something changes. It's subtle. The dust under the spindle starts to darken. A whisper of smoke curls up. Not white, but a rich grey, like the exhale of a sleepy dragon. You stop, gently blow on the coal and drop it into a nest of dry tinder. Crushed bark, pine needles, maybe even some shredded denim if things are dire. You breathe like it's a secret you're trying not to startle, and then, puff, a tongue of flame licks up from the pile. You sit back, shocked. It's not a big fire. It's not even particularly useful yet, but it's yours, made by your hands, your sweat, your tenacity. And if there's anything that tells the wild you belong here, it's fire born from nothing but grit and repetition. Frontiersmen knew 1,000 ways to make fire because failure was not an option. Fire was heat, light, safety. A way to cook meat that wouldn't give you nightmares and digestive trauma. It was a deterrent against predators, a signal to other travellers, and sometimes the only friend you had when the cold started whispering fatal lullabies. There were alternative methods too. Flint and steel, sure, if you had them, but flint doesn't always spark on command. The sun and glass method worked if you had a lens and perfect timing. Some survivalists even carried charcloth, bits of linen cooked in a tin so they'd catch sparks easily. But the friction methods, bow drill, hand drill, fire plough, those were the purest, the most stubborn, the ones that didn't depend on gear you could lose. It's here that you start to appreciate just how much thought went into something we now take for granted. The choice of wood mattered. The spindle should be a soft wood like cedar or willow, something that smokes without catching fire itself. The hearthboard needed to match, and the bearing block, that top piece where the spindle spins, had to be harder, smoother, often lubricated with pine sap or animal fat to reduce friction there so you could increase it below. Every component had a role, and none of it worked if you were lazy, impatient, or sloppy. You remember hearing once that some Native American tribes would test young men with fire-making as a rite of passage. No match, no flint, no dinner. Just you, your tools, and the knowledge passed down through generations. It wasn't just survival, it was a measure of character. And then there's the weird history, like the old fur traders who believed women had better luck starting friction fires because of something about gentle touch and spiritual balance. Is it nonsense? Probably. But try telling that to a grizzled mountain man who just watched his wife light a fire in 30 seconds, while he sweated over his own like a caveman with performance issues. There's even debate among historians about just how often friction fire was used. Some argue that it was a last resort, a backup to flint and steel or coal-carried embers. Others claim it was routine, especially in wet conditions where dry tinder was rare and striking a spark just wouldn't cut it. There are journals, half-burned sketches, even debates over how Lewis and Clark made fires when their gear was soaked. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Later, when you sit beside your small fire, the warmth soaking into your legs and the smoke curling lazily into the air, you realise it's not just about heat, it's about power. For the first time out here, you've made something, not found it, not borrowed it, not trapped it. You created a living flame. That spark, that's yours. It obeys you. As night falls, you feed the fire slowly. A few twigs, a dry branch, a pine cone for fun. You feel connected to something ancient, something shared across every culture, every era. Fire is older than memory, older than language, and now you've earned it. But it's not all romantic. Ash gets in your eyes, sparks nip your hands. You'll smell like smoke for days, and in a pinch, fire can betray you, drawing attention, draining resources, and turning on you if you get careless. That's the irony. The same flame that saves you can also doom you. Still, in the balance of wild living, there's nothing more empowering than knowing you don't need a lighter to survive. Just wood, sweat, time, and enough stubbornness to make even the elements back off for the night. You wake up to the soft hiss of dew dripping from pine needles, your fire long gone cold, your breath clouding faintly in the morning chill. The trees loom like silent sentries around you, and for a second you have no idea where you are. That's not a metaphor. You're genuinely lost. The good news, you haven't screamed yet. The bad news, you probably should have paid better attention to your surroundings before you wandered off to relieve yourself half asleep. But this is exactly why the fourth survival skill matters. Navigating with nothing but the natural world and a little common sense. There's no compass swinging from your belt. Your phone, if it even made it out here, is a glorified flashlight at this point. So you do what the frontiersmen did. You listen, you look, you breathe. Navigation wasn't about tools back then, it was about observation. Where does the sun rise? What direction do the clouds move? What side of the tree is the moss growing on? And more importantly, what's the context? You start with the moss trick, that old cliché. Sure enough, thick green fuzz clings to one side of the nearby tree trunks. North, right? Well, maybe. You remember now, moss grows where it's moist, not just where it's shady. That means in a dense forest like this, the moss could be on any side, depending on water runoff, tree cover, and even animal traffic. It's a hint, not gospel. Still, you note the general trend. Most of it seems to favour one side. You pick that direction and keep it in mind, but you're not betting your life on green fuzz. Then there's the trees themselves. Pines tend to lean ever so slightly away from prevailing winds, usually west to east in these parts. You glance up. Yep, they're angling just enough to suggest yesterday's breeze wasn't random. Bark is thicker and rougher on the north side, smoother on the south. You test it, comparing a few trunks. There's a pattern. Subtle, but there. You start piecing it together like a puzzle. Tree growth, wind lean, shadow angles, and even the shape of anthills. Yes, again with the ants. They tend to build entrances facing the morning sun, but nothing's quite as dependable as the sky. Around mid-morning, the sun climbs into view through the breaks in the canopy. You extend your arm and mark its position. A little east of centre, meaning you're still in the earlier part of the day. You hold a stick upright and watch its shadow. After 10 minutes, the shadow has moved slightly, enough to estimate direction. West is where the shadow moves away from. East is where it leans toward. You build your own compass, one shadow at a time. That's when you hear it. A faint trickle, like a nervous whisper. Water. A stream or runoff. Maybe even a spring. Water always flows downhill, and downhill usually leads to civilization, or at least a wider river. You follow the sound, picking your way through underbrush, stepping over roots and through webs you really hope were abandoned. The water appears, narrow and fast-moving, tumbling over rocks. You crouch and sip a handful. Cold, clear, probably glacial. You make a note to boil some later just in case there's a parasite with your name on it. Streams are like roads in the wilderness. You can follow them, not directly unless you want to twist an ankle, but you can trace their path. Trees change near water. You start noticing more willows, fewer firs. Animal trails hug the banks. Old trappers and scouts called these game corridors. If you're lucky, you might even find a marker, a carved tree, a scratched rock, something a human left behind. You spot a tree with a faint notch cut near the base. Could be natural, could be a blaze, a trail marker. Either way you follow. Here's a fun bit of frontier weirdness. Some woodsmen swore by moon direction, claiming you could navigate at night by remembering which phase the moon was in and which part of the sky it favoured. Waxing moons rose in the east, waning ones leaned west. Accurate? Borderline folklore. But if you're lost under a starry sky with nothing else, it's better than wandering aimlessly. And speaking of stars, nothing beats Polaris, the North Star. If it's dark enough and clear, you find the Big Dipper, trace the line from the two front stars of the bowl, and follow it to the one star that seems not to move. That's your true north. Frontiersmen navigated entire territories by that single point of light. No batteries, no blinking satellite icons, just a stubborn little star holding still while the world spun around it. You keep moving, now more confident, using every natural cue as a breadcrumb. The terrain becomes more familiar. That split rock, you passed it yesterday. Those birch trees, you remember swearing at them when you tripped over a root. You're close, and just like that you stumble into your original camp. The scorched ring of last night's fire, your bundled supplies still dry beneath their makeshift lean-to. Relief hits you like warm soup after a cold rain. You weren't as lost as you feared, but you were lost enough to learn something. The scholarly debate here is subtle, but important. Did most frontiersmen actually master natural navigation, or did they just memorize their routes and landmarks? Some historians say the real pros, scouts, fur trappers, native guides, used environmental clues with incredible precision. Others argue the average settler couldn't navigate worth beans and just stuck close to well-worn paths or rivers. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Skill varied wildly, and survival often came down to the quiet ones who watched and listened more than they talked. You settle back into your camp, heart still thumping from the stress. A fire is next, maybe breakfast. But something's changed. The forest doesn't feel like a trap anymore. It feels like a map, a breathing, moving guide that doesn't lie but also doesn't help the lazy. You have to earn your direction out here, and now you know how. You don't wake up hungry. You wake up hollow. It's the kind of emptiness that sits deep in your core like your stomach is chewing itself in slow, sarcastic protest. You burned through yesterday's rabbit hours ago, and now your body's sending you passive-aggressive reminders that calories are not optional. So you dig through your gear, or what's left of it, and pull out one of the most gloriously ugly inventions of frontier survival, pemmican. It's not beautiful. In fact, it looks like something scraped from the underside of a bison. But this greasy, dense brick of weird is a legit frontier superfood. Early trappers, explorers, and native tribes treated it like gold because it was. Pemmican could outlive you. Seriously. Properly made, it could last for years, and not the fake snack bar kind of years. We're talking buried under snow for 2 winters and still edible years. You take a bite. It's alarming. A mash of dried meat, rendered fat, and crushed berries. Savoury, greasy, with an occasional sweet pop. The texture ranges from crumbly to chewy to suspiciously crunchy, but it hits your bloodstream like rocket fuel. Within minutes your limbs stop whining, your brain clears a little, and you're back on your feet. That's the magic. Pemmican wasn't about flavour, it was about function. Let's break it down. Traditionally it starts with dried meat. Buffalo if you had it, venison if you were lucky, squirrel if you were desperate. You slice it into thin strips and dry it over a slow fire or in the sun until it's brittle. Then you pound it into powder. Next you melt down fat, also from the animal, and mix it in until the meat becomes a sticky, dense mass. Add dried berries, like chokecherries, cranberries or blueberries, for taste and a hint of vitamins, and boom, pemmican. The ratio was key, roughly half meat, half fat by weight. Why so much fat? Because calories. A single chunk of pemmican could carry more than 1,000 calories, enough to keep you moving when your body wanted to lie down and die. Frontiersmen could travel days on pemmican alone, stuffing it into packs like edible bricks of endurance. And it didn't need to be cooked. No preparation. Just chew and move. That's why it became the official ration of the fur trade. The Hudson's Bay Company practically ran on pemmican. Voyageurs carried it in sacks the size of toddlers, doling out handfuls between paddling 10-hour days upriver. It became currency, supply chain, and sustenance all at once. The origin of this culinary Frankenstein? Most likely the Cree and Métis peoples. Their versions were incredibly efficient and way more balanced than what European trappers later bastardized. Native recipes often included ground bone, extra marrow, and specific berries for both nutrition and medicinal value. But of course, as soon as it hit white hands, someone inevitably said, "What if we made it less healthy and more horrifying? Q-salted fat bricks wrapped in rawhide. You nibble on your chunk, chewing slowly. It melts in your mouth, not pleasantly, but effectively. You feel the heat of it spread through your chest and stomach, like a little fire being lit inside. It's not joy, but it's strength, and strength is all you need right now." Fun fact, some frontiersmen actually fried pemmican into stews or cakes called rubabou or rere. It was a way to break the monotony and make it a little more tolerable. Add some roots, a wild onion, maybe a crushed biscuit, and you'd have something like, well, not a gourmet meal, but something warm and vaguely soupy. Here's the weirdest part. Archaeologists still find pemmican, not just references to it, actual pieces. Some dug up from old trading posts or forgotten trail caches, still intact. There's debate on whether it's safe to eat, spoiler don't, but the fact that it even exists after a century or more, that's the frontier version of Twinkie immortality. Of course, scholars have their debates. Was pemmican truly the best ration, or just the most convenient? Some argue that it lacked vitamin C, leading to scurvy and long expeditions unless paired with foraged greens or pine needle tea. Others suggest it was so calorie-dense that men burned it too fast in cold climates and still needed supplemental food. And then there's the moral question. As European settlers relied on pemmican more and more, they overhunted buffalo to near extinction, gutting the food supply of the very indigenous communities who created the recipe in the first place. But here, now, those ethical arguments are paused. You're alone in the woods, and this greasy, ugly cube is the difference between another hour of hiking or a nap you might not wake up from. You wipe your hands on your pants, grease stains joining the rest, and feel your body stir awake again, legs steady, heart even, eyes alert. You pack the remaining chunks away carefully, wrapped in oilcloth. This isn't casual food, it's emergency food. The kind of stuff you ration when the weather turns, the snares come up empty, and the berries are out of season. You think about caching some near a rock formation you passed, just in case you get lost again. Another skill, another day. For now, you stretch, crack your neck, and shoulder your bag. One last bite, and you're back on the move, carried forward by a centuries-old recipe that somehow outperformed every protein bar in your old life. Ugly, greasy, tough. But pemmican keeps you alive. The trail you're following, if you can even call it that, turns into a game of animal whispers. No clear path, no signposts. Just broken twigs, subtle paw prints, and the kind of disturbed leaves that make you squint and wonder, was that me or something else? This is where survival skill number 6 steps in, tracking animal sign. And it's not just for hunting. Out here, learning to read the daily gossip of the wilderness means knowing where food is, where danger sleeps, and where you should never, ever pitch your camp. You start to notice them. Footprints. At first they're hard to see, just vague impressions in the soft earth. But then they start to speak. A cloven hoof print here. Deer, likely. Maybe 2 or 3 of them, moving single file through the brush. You crouch and press your fingers beside one. The edges are sharp, the soil still slightly springy. Not fresh, but recent. Maybe this morning. A few paces further, a different shape. Rounded pads, claws faintly visible. Not a domestic dog. No one's walking their golden retriever out here. This is wild canine. Coyote or wolf. You study the spacing between steps. Long strides, tight grouping. Probably a lone wolf. Your gut tightens, but it's not fear exactly. It's awareness. That primal hum in your blood that says, you're not alone, and you never really are. Back in the day, frontiersmen relied heavily on reading animal sign. It wasn't just about finding dinner, it was about staying alive. Paw prints, droppings, fur snags, claw marks on trees, all were part of the wilderness bulletin board. The more fluent you became in this language, the longer you lasted. Now you find scat, animal droppings, because yes, that's part of the job. This one's pellet-like and dry. Herbivore. Deer again, likely the same group. You remember reading that indigenous trackers could tell how long ago an animal passed by the heat of its dung. You're not that committed yet, but you do tap it with a stick. Warmish. Okay, moving on. You come across a fallen log with the bark shredded on one side, deep gouges running vertically. Bear. Black bear, judging by the height. Grizzlies don't usually live this far into these woods, but still, you note it. Bears will mark trees to claim territory or stretch. These weren't random scratches, they were a post, a billboard. You don't need to be fluent in bear to get the message. Mine. The forest gets quieter as you move forward. That's another sign. Birds go silent when something big passes through. You hear your own breathing too loudly, feel your heartbeat in your ears. Then, snap. A quick crunch in the underbrush, you freeze. Something's moving ahead. It's heavy but not crashing. Methodical. You ease your way around a tree and catch a glimpse. A doe, graceful and twitchy, moving through the brush like it's on tiptoe. You don't even breathe until it vanishes from view. And suddenly, all those signs, the hoofprints, the droppings, the bent grass, they click into a path. Here's the wild part. Frontier scouts could track like detectives. Some use snow, mud, or ash to study fresh tracks, but others just read impressions in moss or broken spiderwebs. They'd estimate weight, speed, injury, even mood, from the way a foot dragged or how deeply it pressed. You're not there yet, but you're beginning to see it. The woods aren't random. They're a journal, if you know how to read. Some trackers even claim they could distinguish individual animals. That's the old bull elk with a limp in the right hind leg, they'd say, and then prove it. Skeptical? Sure. But in a world without binoculars, rifles with scopes or trail cams, they made up the difference with observation and obsession. You pause at a spot where the dirt's churned up and flattened. A bed. Something slept here. You reach down and feel the warmth still rising faintly from the soil. Fur snagged on a low branch above. Coarse, grey. Wolf again. You slowly back away, minding every footstep. Tracking is a two-way street. You follow, you learn, but you also leave tracks. And out here, leaving too many signs can turn the hunter into prey. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some trappers swore by listening to crows as an indirect tracking method. Crows are nosy gossips of the forest, always following anything unusual, like a predator, a kill site, or a human. If they're gathering and squawking in a specific area, there's a reason. Could be a carcass, could be a cougar, could be you walking into something you don't want to meet. The crows know. They always know. You keep walking, slower now. Every broken twig becomes suspicious. Every overturned stone, every bent blade of grass, it all matters. You start seeing more furrows in the dirt, wider, heavier, maybe elk, and then you find tracks with deeper toe imprints and a slightly dragging gait. Human, booted, heading southwest, not yours. Your breath tightens. Could be another trapper, could be a hunter, could be someone just as hungry as you, but less polite. You follow the tracks for a while, but they veer into a ravine and vanish in the rock. You decide not to pursue. Out here, curiosity can be expensive, and here's the scholarly argument, still unsettled. Were frontiersmen truly great trackers, or is that another tall tale we love to romanticize? Some say the best trackers were always native scouts, and that most European settlers were sloppy at best, relying on luck or brute force. Others point to journals and first-hand accounts of white trappers who did master the art, blending learned skills with hard-earned instinct. Like most frontier truths, the answer is probably tangled somewhere between respect and appropriation. The sun sinks low again, casting long shadows that stretch like fingers across the forest floor. You kneel by a fresh set of deer tracks, tracing the outline in the dust. You feel like you're part of the story now, not just reading it, but writing your own line. The wind shifts. You smell pine, soil, and something sharper. Maybe wet fur, maybe nothing. Either way, you're listening. The clouds start to gather in the early afternoon, drifting in like a slow-motion threat. 1 minute you're squinting at the sun and swatting mosquitoes. The next you feel the first cold drop of rain hit the back of your neck like nature's version of a warning slap. Out here, when the sky changes, you change with it. Because if you don't find shelter before the storm hits, you're going to learn firsthand why exposure, not hunger, not bears, is the #1 killer in the wild. Time for survival skill number 7, emergency shelter building, the wet, muddy, glorious art of not dying in the rain. You scan the terrain. Trees everywhere. Flat ground, rare, natural overhangs, none in sight. You don't have a tent. You don't even have a tarp. Just some cordage, a knife, and a brain that's currently racing through every memory of wilderness tutorials you've half watched and half remembered. The clock is ticking, the wind picks up and the birds go silent. You spot a low area beneath a tangle of fallen trees, half covered in moss. Not perfect, but it's a start. You get to work. First, structure. You drag a thick branch into a ridgepole between two stumps, then lean other sticks against it to form a slanted frame. It's crude, it's uneven, but it's something. Next comes insulation. You gather pine boughs, dead leaves, ferns, anything dryish and layered. You start layering them over the frame like shingles, overlapping them so the rain will shed off instead of drip through. Your hands are scratched, your knees are muddy. You are, for all intents and purposes, becoming one with the forest floor. And then you remember the ground. Cold, wet, lethal if you lie directly on it. So you build a bed, a thick mat of leaves, branches, bark strips, anything to lift you off the cold earth by even a few inches. It's not soft, but it's insulating, and insulation means survival. The rain hits just as you finish your final patch. It's not a light drizzle, it's a full, sloppy downpour, like the sky suddenly realised you weren't miserable enough. You dive inside your shelter, curl up on your makeshift mattress, and wait. The smell is earthy, musty, alive. Rain taps on the leaf roof above you in a rhythm that's almost soothing, if you weren't actively wondering whether you'll wake up in a puddle. But somehow, it holds. Water trickles down the sides but doesn't drip through. Your bed stays dryish. The wind whistles outside, tugging at the shelter like it's testing its strength, but the ridgepole holds. It's not pretty, it's barely respectable, but it's working, and that's the entire point. Frontiersmen had to master shelter building fast, or they simply didn't wake up the next morning. Weather didn't care about your experience level. A cold snap could kill just as quickly as a cougar. Rain could soak you through and rob your body heat in minutes. And snow? Don't even start. Out here the elements always win, unless you build something that cheats them. Some use lean-tos, like the one you just made. Others dug shallow trenches and stretched bark or hides over them to form low-roofed huts. The most ambitious built entire brush lodges or used debris to form domed nests like giant bird shelters. The guiding principle was always the same. Insulate, elevate, ventilate, and make sure you don't trap your own smoke if you're foolish enough to light a fire inside. Here's where things get interesting. In a pinch, some trappers used animal hides as shelter walls. After a successful hunt, they'd stretch a skin over a frame and sleep inside it like a prehistoric sleeping bag. Warm? Absolutely. Horrifying. Also, yes, especially if you're sharing space with leftover smell and the occasional curious scavenger. One recorded frontier oddity involved using hollow logs as emergency shelters. A tight squeeze, sure, but if you found one big enough and could evict whatever lived there, you had instant protection from wind and rain. Some trappers even carved shallow grooves inside to let condensation drip away instead of soaking their bedding. Resourceful. Also possibly insane. The scholarly debate here centres around just how advanced frontiersmen's shelters were. Some argue they were primitive, relying heavily on luck and improvisation. Others believe that certain groups, especially those with indigenous guides, constructed sophisticated, weatherproof dwellings using local knowledge and techniques. The truth, again, lies somewhere in the mess. Some men froze to death in half-baked brush piles, while others built snowblock mansions that withstood blizzards. You huddle in your shelter as the wind howls louder. You can't stretch your legs, your right foot's asleep, but you're dry, you're alive, and in the middle of nowhere, that's all that matters. You think about how much more comfortable a proper tent would be, sure, but you also realise something else. You built this with your own two hands. Nothing fancy, nothing store-bought, just instinct, desperation, and sticks. Honestly, it kind of rules. Hours pass, the rain slows, you peek outside, the forest glistens, washed clean, mist curls up from the ground like steam from a just-emptied pot. Everything smells sharper now. Pine, wet earth, a faint musky trace of something that might be elk or something larger. You make a mental note to build your next shelter a little higher, a little tighter, maybe add some drainage. But this one? It worked. You passed the test. The trick now is letting it dry out, collecting more insulation before the next storm rolls in, and not getting too cocky. Because just when you think you've figured it out, the wilderness has a habit of humbling you. Still, you can't help but feel a little smug. You beat the weather this time. You step out, stretch, and shake off the pine needles clinging to your shirt like woodland confetti. The sun breaks through the clouds for a second, just long enough to dry your face and light up the world around you in that perfect post-storm glow. Shelter, built, body, alive. The clouds start to gather in the early afternoon, drifting in like a slow-motion threat. 1 minute you're squinting at the sun and swatting mosquitoes. The next you feel the first cold drop of rain hit the back of your neck like nature's version of a warning slap. Out here, when the sky changes, you change with it. Because if you don't find shelter before the storm hits, you're going to learn firsthand why exposure, not hunger, not bears, is the #1 killer in the wild. Time for survival skill number 7. Emergency shelter building. The wet, muddy, glorious art of not dying in the rain. You scan the terrain. Trees? Everywhere. Flat ground? Rare. Natural overhangs? None in sight. You don't have a tent. You don't even have a tarp. Just some cordage, a knife, and a brain that's currently racing through every memory of wilderness tutorials you've half watched and half remembered. The clock is ticking. The wind picks up and the birds go silent. You spot a low area beneath a tangle of fallen trees, half covered in moss. Not perfect, but it's a start. You get to work. First, structure. You drag a thick branch into a ridgepole between 2 stumps, then lean other sticks against it to form a slanted frame. It's crude, it's uneven, but it's something. Next comes insulation. You gather pine boughs, dead leaves, ferns, anything dryish and layered. You start layering them over the frame like shingles, overlapping them so the rain will shed off instead of drip through. Your hands are scratched, your knees are muddy. You are, for all intents and purposes, becoming one with the forest floor, and then you remember the ground. Cold, wet, lethal if you lie directly on it. So you build a bed, a thick mat of leaves, branches, bark strips, anything to lift you off the cold earth by even a few inches. It's not soft, but it's insulating. And insulation means survival. The rain hits just as you finish your final patch. It's not a light drizzle. It's a full, sloppy downpour, like the sky suddenly realized you weren't miserable enough. You dive inside your shelter, curl up on your makeshift mattress, and wait. The smell is earthy, musty, alive. Rain taps on the leaf roof above you in a rhythm that's almost soothing, if you weren't actively wondering whether you'll wake up in a puddle. But somehow, it holds. Water trickles down the side but doesn't drip through. Your bed stays dryish. The wind whistles outside, tugging at the shelter like it's testing its strength, but the ridgepole holds. It's not pretty, it's barely respectable, but it's working, and that's the entire point. Frontiersmen had to master shelter building fast, or they simply didn't wake up the next morning. Weather didn't care about your experience level. A cold snap could kill just as quickly as a cougar. Rain could soak you through and rob your body heat in minutes. And snow? Don't even start. Out here, the elements always win, unless you build something that cheats them. Some used lean-tos like the one you just made. Others dug shallow trenches and stretched bark or hides over them to form low-roofed huts. The most ambitious built entire brush lodges or used debris to form domed nests like giant bird shelters. The guiding principle was always the same: insulate, elevate, ventilate, and make sure you don't trap your own smoke if you're foolish enough to light a fire inside. Here's where things get interesting. In a pinch, some trappers used animal hides as shelter walls. After a successful hunt, they'd stretch a skin over a frame and sleep inside it like a prehistoric sleeping bag. Warm? Absolutely. Horrifying? Also, yes. Especially if you're sharing space with leftover smell and the occasional curious scavenger. One recorded frontier oddity involved using hollow logs as emergency shelters. A tight squeeze, sure, but if you found one big enough and could evict whatever lived there, you had instant protection from wind and rain. Some trappers even carved shallow grooves inside to let condensation drip away instead of soaking their bedding. Resourceful, also possibly insane. The scholarly debate here centers around just how advanced frontiersmen's shelters were. Some argue they were primitive, relying heavily on luck and improvisation. Others believe that certain groups, especially those with indigenous guides, constructed sophisticated, weatherproof dwellings using local knowledge and techniques. The truth, again, lies somewhere in the mess. Some men froze to death in half-baked brush piles, while others built snowblock mansions that withstood blizzards. You huddle in your shelter as the wind howls louder. You can't stretch your legs, your right foot's asleep, but you're dry, you're alive, and in the middle of nowhere, that's all that matters. You think about how much more comfortable a proper tent would be, sure, but you also realise something else. You built this with your own two hands, nothing fancy, nothing store-bought, just instinct, desperation, and sticks. Honestly, it kind of rules. Hours pass, the rain slows, you peek outside, the forest glistens, washed clean. Mist curls up from the ground like steam from a just-emptied pot. Everything smells sharper now. Pine, wet earth, a faint musky trace of something that might be elk or something larger. You make a mental note to build your next shelter a little higher, a little tighter, maybe add some drainage. But this one? It worked. You passed the test. The trick now is letting it dry out, collecting more insulation before the next storm rolls in, and not getting too cocky. Because just when you think you've figured it out, the wilderness has a habit of humbling you. Still, you can't help but feel a little smug. You beat the weather this time. You step out, stretch, and shake off the pine needles clinging to your shirt like woodland confetti. The sun breaks through the clouds for a second, just long enough to dry your face and light up the world around you in that perfect post-storm glow. Shelter, built. Body, alive. Spirit, slightly smug. Water's everywhere, but out here most of it is trying to kill you. The cheerful little stream bubbling beside your path could be laced with parasites. That crystal clear lake may as well be a bottle of cholera with a scenic view. One of the oldest, most forgotten survival skills is also one of the most important. Finding drinkable water from places no one ever taught you to look. You're already dehydrated. You didn't notice at first. Just a dry mouth, then a bit of dizziness when you stood up too fast. But now your head throbs like you're wearing a helmet made of regret. Time to hydrate, but safely. The frontier trick was this. Never trust moving water just because it looks clean. Giardia, bacteria, and other microscopic horrors don't wave at you from the current. So, you don't gamble, you start looking elsewhere. First option? Dew. It's early morning, and the leaves are beaded with droplets. You take a bandana, swipe it across the foliage, wring it out into your mouth. It's slow, awkward, but surprisingly effective. In some cases, an hour of dew harvesting can get you half a litre. Not bad, considering it cost you 0 calories and minimal risk. Next, you go to the trees. Certain ones give up moisture more willingly than others. Birch trees, for instance, can be tapped in spring. You slice a shallow notch in the bark with your knife, wedge in a stick, and wait. A few slow drops of sweet, clear liquid slide down. It's not fast, but it's safe and delicious, like the forest brewed a tiny batch of sugar water just for you. And then there's the wild method, digging gypsy wells. You find a spot a few feet from the edge of a stream or marsh, dig down about 2 feet, and wait for groundwater to seep in. The idea is the soil filters out the worst stuff. Let it sit for an hour or so, then skim off the top layer. Not perfect, not fast, but if you boil it after, you're golden. This was a trick used by trappers, soldiers, and anyone stuck near questionable water without a boiling pot right away. Your fingers are already caked in mud when you remember another classic, solar stills. You find a patch of damp earth, dig a shallow basin, put a cup or can in the centre, cover it with plastic, if you have any, and weigh down the middle with a stone. Over the day, the sun pulls moisture from the soil, which condenses on the underside of the plastic and drips into the cup. Frontier folks didn't have plastic wrap, obviously, but they'd use animal bladders or oiled cloths in the same way. If you can stomach the aesthetics, it's a brilliant method of making clean water out of basically dirt and sun. One of the most overlooked sources? Vines. Not all are safe, but some jungle vines, or in temperate zones, grapevines, can be cut and drained. You slice near the bottom and lift the vine vertically. Water flows in a slow trickle, earthy but clean. It's like nature's version of a reusable water bottle, and depending on the vine, you might pull a pint or more from a single cut. And here's a fun fact from the fringe. Some early frontiersmen swore by licking frog bellies. No, seriously. The theory was that frogs absorb moisture from their surroundings, and the dew that clings to their bellies is safe and pure. The reality? Gross and possibly very ineffective, but it tells you how desperate and creative people got when they were on the edge of dehydration. There's no hard evidence this ever saved a life, but it's one of those stories that stuck around, probably as much for the mental image as the actual science. Meanwhile, scholarly debates continue about just how accurate frontier water sourcing really was. Some say the idea of safe natural springs was mostly myth, that many illnesses blamed on bad air were actually waterborne. Others argue that those who lived long enough figured it out by trial and error, and the ones who didn't, well, they're not part of the data set. Modern science backs up a lot of the old methods, but it also reveals just how risky many of them were. Boiling water was the gold standard, and most seasoned frontiersmen carried a pot or tin cup with them everywhere, if they were smart. You thankfully do have a metal cup, even if it's dented and blackened from overuse. You set up a small fire, carefully hidden this time, low and smokeless, and boil the water you scraped from your gypsy well. It takes time, but when the bubbles roll and steam curls upward, you feel that rare sense of control. You've outwitted the forest for another hour. You take a sip. It tastes faintly like dirt and victory. You can feel it sliding down into your stomach like it belongs there. Your hands stop trembling. Your lips stop cracking. It's not just hydration. It's energy, awareness, life returning to your limbs. Out here, finding water isn't a convenience, it's a skill, a constant day-by-day demand that punishes complacency. The guys who survived the frontier, they didn't wait to get thirsty. They thought like plants. They watched the moss, followed the birds, took note when insects buzzed around certain damp logs or dragonflies circled a clearing. Water isn't always obvious, but it's always around, if you learn how to ask the right questions. And tonight, as you sit beside your tiny flickering fire with your cup of boiled marsh water, you feel richer than most people sitting in homes with running taps and filtered fridges, because you earned every drop. Tomorrow you'll have to do it again, but tonight you drink. You're carving a stick when it happens. A slip of the hand, just a flick of the blade across the wrong angle, and suddenly your thumb is bleeding. Not gushing, but steady. The kind of cut that goes deep and wide enough to make you instantly regret every decision that led to you holding a sharp object in the woods. You drop the knife and press your shirt to the wound, adrenaline flaring. It hurts, yes, but more than that, it's scary. Out here, there's no first aid kit, no urgent care down the road. Welcome to survival skill number 9, primitive first aid, or as frontiersmen called it, not dying of incredibly dumb injuries. You wrap the wound tight with a scrap of fabric, but it's not enough. The bleeding slows, but doesn't stop, so you go back to basics. The knowledge buried deep in those old wilderness journals, passed from one bloodied, stubborn survivor to the next. You look for pine sap, the original frontier superglue. You spot a tree, gouge the bark carefully, and let the resin ooze. It's sticky, golden, and carries natural antiseptic properties. You smear it gently over the cleaned wound, using pressure and patience to let it form a crude seal. It stings like betrayal, but it works. Next, you need to prevent infection. That's where your mental list of frontier remedies kicks in. Yarrow, if you can find it, has been used for thousands of years to stop bleeding and fight bacteria. You recognize its feathery leaves growing by a fallen log and crush some into a paste. You pack it into the dressing, securing it with twine. If this works, the wound will dry and tighten in a day or two. If not, you're looking at fever, swelling, and the slow slide towards something worse, and that's the terrifying part. Out here, the smallest injuries spiral fast. A splinter can become an abscess, a blister can turn into a festering hole, a twisted ankle becomes a death sentence if you can't move. The frontiersmen knew this. Their survival wasn't just about brute strength or clever traps. It was about keeping their bodies patched together with whatever they had. You remember a trick for cuts and gashes? Spider webs. Yes, actual webs. Sticky, tensile, and surprisingly sterile. You find one stretched between two branches and, after apologizing to its original tenant, gather it gently onto a stick. Pressed into a wound, webs can act like gauze, trapping blood, holding the skin closed, and even helping clotting. It sounds like witchcraft, but it's just one of those weird nature hacks that actually works. Your next priority is pain management. No morphine, no ibuprofen, just what you can find. Some old trappers swore by willow bark, chewed raw or boiled into tea. It contains salicin, a natural painkiller similar to aspirin. You strip some bark from a young willow near the stream and start chewing. It's bitter, gritty, and tastes like bark, because it is. but slowly the ache in your thumb dulls from sharp fire to a manageable throb. Then there's inflammation. Plantain leaves, not the banana look-alike but the broadleaf variety, grow in disturbed ground and clearings. You crush one, smear it on the skin, and wrap it tight. The coolness is immediate, and you almost convince yourself you're in a spa that smells like mud and pine needles and fear. You think about the injuries frontiersmen faced: broken bones from falls, burns from fire, punctures from traps. There were no ambulances. You had to set your own bones or pray someone in your group knew how. Splints were made from branches and bark, lashed with sinew or shirt strips. Dislocations, pulled into place with gritted teeth and zero anaesthetic. One trapper's journal describes using bear grease and hot rocks to treat a dislocated shoulder, followed by rest and prayer. That was the entire plan. Burns were soothed with mud, aloe-like plants, or, if you were lucky, a bit of bear fat. You think about how often fires saved you, and how easily it could turn on you. One misplaced coal, and suddenly you're treating third-degree burns with a leaf and optimism. You make a mental note: always respect the fire. Fractures were even worse. If you were alone, you crawled. If you had companions, they carried you, or built a litter from poles and canvas. And if the break was bad enough, amputation wasn't out of the question. Using a heated blade, a shot of whiskey, and someone to hold you down, and yes, this actually happened. The journals don't sugarcoat it. In the wild, survival wasn't pretty. It was practical, bloody, and terrifyingly raw. Now here's a quirky side note. Some old-school frontiersmen believed in snake oil, literally. Rendered snake fat mixed with herbs, applied to wounds or sore muscles. Total fraud. Not entirely. Some of those oils had capsaicin or menthol-like compounds that actually did help circulation or reduce inflammation. Most of it was bunk, of course, but when you're bleeding in the woods, you'll try anything. Modern historians debate how effective all this frontier medicine really was. Some claim it was mostly luck. Those who lived had strong immune systems and sheer stubbornness. Others argue that indigenous medicine, adopted and often stolen by settlers, provided real tested remedies. Yarrow, echinacea, willow, mint, lavender. Plants we now process into pills were once just weeds, with instructions carved into tribal memory. Back in your camp, the storm clouds have passed, and the forest glows with that strange post-rain quiet. Your makeshift bandage is holding. Your thumb throbs but isn't bleeding. You sit back against a log, sip the last of your willowbark tea, and sigh. It's not comfortable, it's not clean, but it's working. You've survived your first real wound, not with antiseptics or gauze or tetanus shots, but with bark, sap, and a bit of animal instinct. Out here, first aid doesn't come in a red plastic box. It comes from memory, from mistakes, and from whatever the forest is willing to give you. Your body isn't perfect, but it's patched, held together by leaves and grit and some long-forgotten wisdom that feels like magic. And right now, that's enough. The footprints aren't yours. You notice them just after sunrise, half sunk into the damp soil near the edge of your camp, where the light brush gives way to soft, silty earth. The prints are broad, heavy, deliberate. Human, not barefoot, booted, fresh, and not the kind of thing you want to find when you thought you were alone for miles. Your breath catches. You glance behind you like some instinct from 10,000 years ago, just woke up and whispered, "You're being followed." It's time for survival skill number 10, tracking and counter-tracking, or how to follow others, and not let anyone follow you. You crouch low, heart thudding. The prints angle away from your camp toward the ridge. Whoever it was passed through during the night or early morning. You didn't hear them, which is a problem. Either they're better at stealth than you, or you were too deep in sleep to notice a bear dragging you away by the foot. Either way, you decide to follow, carefully. The first thing you learn about tracking people is that it's a lot like reading a diary written in code, and some of the entries are lies. The tracks are evenly spaced, about a foot apart. No scuffs, no drag marks. This person was moving confidently, not limping, not panicked. You trace the path for about 20 yards before you find a cigarette butt. Old school, filtered. Maybe a week old, maybe yesterday. You pick it up, sniff it. Stale but recent enough to make your skin crawl. You start thinking like a predator, but also like prey. Because in the wilderness, you're always both. You remember the basic rules of counter-tracking. The stuff that old mountain men knew, as well as they knew how to load a flintlock, walk on hard surfaces when you can, brush out your own tracks with pine boughs, step in the footprints of game or over rocks. If you cross water, exit downstream to confuse anyone watching from the bank. You try to apply these. As you follow the stranger's trail, you also start brushing away your own. Every dozen steps you double back, step sideways, switch to rocky terrain. You pull a branch along behind you to wipe out your boot prints. It's slow, it's tedious, but if someone's watching, you want them to see nothing. The trail leads to a ravine, steep-sided and full of leaf litter. You drop into it and pause. Here's where the forest becomes a chessboard. You think 2 moves ahead. If you were being tracked, where would you hide? Which route would make you visible from above? Which would give you an escape route if things went sideways? You find a second set of prints, smaller, lighter, possibly a woman, or a young man. The tracks intersect briefly with the larger set, then veer off. 2 people? Or did the first person circle back? You chew the inside of your cheek. You don't like this. It feels intentional, like you're being lured. Back in the frontier days, tracking wasn't just for hunting, it was warfare. Native scouts, especially from tribes like the Apache or Comanche, were legendary for their ability to follow or evade. They could read a broken twig like it was a confession, tell whether a rider was wounded from how their horse moved. And on the flip side, they could vanish, leaving false trails, walking backward, even brushing out their own footprints with feathered branches tied to their ankles. Ghosts in the underbrush. Some old-school trappers picked up these techniques. Most didn't. Many paid for it with arrows in their backs, or simply disappeared into the woods, never found again. The skilled ones survived by always assuming they were being watched. That's a mindset, not a method. You have to think like your enemy, or your prey, and assume that the forest is never fully on your side. You find a ridge with loose gravel and do a quick test. You step once. Stones scatter, loud. Step again, softer, placing your foot sideways. Less noise. You mark this in your brain. Noise discipline matters. If they're listening for you, one careless step gives you away. Now for the weird part. Some trappers would purposely fake tracks. Drag a branch behind them to suggest weight. Walk bow-legged to appear injured. Some even carved false boot soles into pieces of wood, strapping them under their feet to leave confusing prints. One journal mentions a man who used carved bear paws as soles, just to throw off rival hunters. Brilliant. Possibly insane. Back in your world, the trail ends near a stream. The prints vanish at the edge. You scan the opposite bank. Nothing obvious. But if it were you, you'd travel downstream to mask your scent and step out where the water's muddier. Less chance of leaving clear prints. You follow that hunch. Sure enough, 50 yards down, you find a smudge in the sand. A partial heel. Gotcha. You don't follow further. Something in your gut says stop. This isn't your fight. Whoever they are, they know the land, and you're not equipped to play hide-and-seek with strangers who roam silently in the night. Instead, you turn your attention back to your trail. You've left too much sign. From here on out, you move differently. You stop stepping in soft soil. You use rocks. You avoid leaving patterns. No rhythm to your pace. You double back again just in case. And when you make camp that night, you don't light a fire. You eat cold pemmican, huddled in shadow, listening. The night has a texture you haven't noticed before. Layers of sound, shifting breezes, tree limbs creaking. Nothing moves nearby, but you don't sleep much anyway. There's a debate among historians about how much of this tracking paranoia was real, and how much was myth. Were frontiersmen truly that skilled at following and evading each other? Or have we romanticized them into superhuman woodsmen? The truth is probably more nuanced. Some were amazing. Others died trying to become amazing. Either way, it mattered. Because out here, leaving tracks wasn't just careless. It was dangerous. You wake the next day stiff and tired but undetected, as far as you can tell. No fresh prints, no broken brush. You move on. From now on, every step you take will leave less behind. You haven't spoken a word in days, and the silence is starting to feel thick, like the forest itself is holding its breath. Every sound, every bird call, every twig snap sits sharper in your ears than it did before. You've noticed your own heartbeat, the scrape of your boots, even the swish of your clothes against the brush. And now you're thinking about another essential forgotten frontier skill: communication without noise, smoke signals, silent signs, and gestures that could mean the difference between rescue and an ambush. Because sometimes, out here, Not speaking says more than shouting ever could. You crouch at the edge of a clearing and imagine you're with a partner. Someone on your team, someone downrange, someone watching. You can't yell. That'll bring everything with teeth straight to you. So instead you think in symbols, universal, visual, quiet. You take a stick and carve a spiral into the dirt. You draw an arrow pointing west, then snap a twig beside it. That's a message. I went this way. It's safe, for now. Frontiersmen used these kinds of signs constantly. A bent sapling tied with grass meant someone passed this way. A stack of rocks, 3 high, leaning slightly, could mark a hidden trail, a cache of food, or a danger zone. Even footprints could be manipulated, turned sideways or partially brushed out, to send a signal to anyone following. Stop here, or loop around, or don't trust what you see. You take a flat rock and scratch a small symbol into the side of a tree. Not deep, not damaging, just a mark. Half circle, your sign. A primitive signature in a place where letters don't matter. Later, if you need to find your way back, this little crescent will catch your eye like an old friend waving from the shadows. Then you build a tiny cairn, 5 stones stacked carefully, each slightly offset. You place it beside a tree with bark peeled in a diagonal slash. Another signal. Not just I was here, but this is a route. To someone else it might mean nothing, but to someone who knows your code, it's a trailhead. Of course, the oldest nonverbal signal on the frontier was the one everyone knew. Smoke. A single column, slow and wide, rising above the treetops. That meant someone had made camp. 2 quick puffs followed by a long one. Possibly danger. Patterns varied by region, but the principle stayed the same. If you saw smoke where there shouldn't be any, you either headed toward it with hope or avoided it with dread. You collect some damp leaves and green wood, stack them in your fire pit and test it out. With the right materials you can make smoke that's visible from miles away. It curls up white and steady at first, then drifts sideways as the wind kicks in. You stamp it out quickly, not because it failed, but because you don't want to actually call attention right now. But it's good to know. A smoky signal could be a lifeline one day, or a trap. You think about how native tribes use gestures in battle, silent hand signs to signal movement, direction, enemy numbers. Some were passed between groups who didn't even speak the same language. The signs became a common tongue in the wilderness, like ASL carved into bark and muscle. Point, fist, open hand, fingers spread, fingers curled. You try a few as you walk, even if there's no one to see them. It's practice. One day, it might matter. You also remember hearing about blazes, marks made on trees to indicate a path. Not deep carvings, but shallow scrapes that expose the pale inner bark. Blazes were used on long trails, trap lines, or to mark property boundaries. The trick was making them noticeable without advertising them to just anyone. A skilled trapper could make a mark low on the inside of a bend, hidden behind a branch, visible only if you knew where to look. There's a strange frontier habit you test for yourself. You tie a tuft of animal fur, collected from a bush, around a twig, and leave it hanging at eye level. No natural process creates that shape, so if someone sees it, they'll know it's intentional. Could mean anything, depending on who sees it. Which is the point. You start to get why these systems mattered. In an age without phones, without radios, without even shouting in many situations, people got creative. Messages carved into logs, trails marked with charred sticks, even broken branches pointing subtly in a specific direction. The forest became a chalkboard, and every survivalist had their own dialect. Here's a lesser-known frontier trick: knotted grass. You braid or knot strands in a certain way and tie them around low branches or tall grass. Each knot means something. 1 means danger, 2 means food nearby, 3 could be a warning, hostile territory. It sounds silly now, but when you're exhausted, sunburned, and half-starved, even the simplest visual cue can mean everything. Scholars argue about how much of this was systemized versus improvised. Were these methods universally understood, or did they vary wildly between groups? Some say certain fur companies and scout teams developed their own coded signs, like ancient hobo symbols or wartime shorthand. Others believe most communication was totally personal, understood only by the few who created it. The truth? Probably both. Like graffiti tags in a city. Some symbols are universal, others cryptic by design. Now here's a weird, wonderful footnote. Some trappers were known to leave poems carved into trees or painted on rocks. Little messages to the next soul passing through, part warning, part poetry, part madness. The trail runs dry where the hawks fly low, one reads. Another, if you find this, eat the pemmican under the flat stone and don't wait for me. Romantic, creepy, maybe both. But it reminds you that communication in the wild wasn't just survival. It was connection, a way to say, I was here and you're not alone. As night falls, you set up camp in a hollow beneath some tall firs. No fire tonight, no noise, just shadows and signals. You mark a nearby tree with your crescent symbol, add a small pile of pebbles at its base, then drag a branch behind you as you leave to sweep your trail clean. Maybe no one will ever see it, but if they do, they'll know someone came this way, someone who watched, someone who moved quietly, someone who didn't need to say a word to be heard. The deer carcass is fresh, still warm, steam rising from the entry wound just behind the shoulder. You didn't kill it. That's the first thing you realise. There are no blood trails leading up to it, no sign of a struggle, just the body, half hidden beneath a scatter of leaves as if something tried to cover it. A cougar maybe? Or a wolf with other plans? Either way, you're standing over 80 pounds of meat, and all you've got is a belt knife, a few cordage scraps, and your wits. You know what time it is. Survival skill number 12, brain tanning buckskin, or, more accurately, how to turn dead deer into soft wearable gold without losing your mind or your lunch. First, the skinning. You kneel beside the deer and draw your blade carefully along the belly. You've done this before, or maybe you've watched enough survival videos to fake it, but the reality is messier. The hide peels back slowly, sticking like wet carpet. You take your time, separating skin from muscle with short, shallow cuts. The trick is not to puncture the hide too much, especially if you want to use it later. Eventually it's off, steaming, reeking, heavy as hell. You drag it aside and roll it up, blood side in. The meat, you'll deal with that later, but the hide is what matters now. This isn't about fashion. This is about clothing, bags, cordage, insulation, survival fabric. Buckskin is what kept frontiersmen warm, dry, and dressed in something that didn't fall apart after a few weeks in the elements. Now comes the part that separates the casual from the committed, fleshing the hide. You find a downed log, stretch the hide over it, and grab a scraping tool. Bone if you're going full frontier mode, or just a sharpened stick if you're improvising. You push and scrape, removing every trace of flesh, fat, and connective tissue. It's laborious. Your arms ache. The smell is somewhere between a slaughterhouse and wet dog left in the sun, but you keep at it, scraping from centre out until the skin is clean. Next, dehairing. Some frontiersmen left the hair on, especially for winter garments or sleeping hides, but buckskin, real, wearable, butter-soft buckskin, needs to be hairless. You soak the hide in a solution of wood ash and water for a day or two. The alkaline mix loosens the follicles, then you scrape again, harder this time. The hair comes off in tufts, leaving behind a pale, raw surface that looks more like suede than fur. It's starting to resemble something useful. But you're not even close to done, because now comes the weird part, the part that earns brain tanning its name. You need brains. Yup, brains. Deer brains, to be specific, though any mammal will technically work. One deer brain contains just enough oils and lecithin to tan its own hide. Nature's twisted little symmetry. You retrieve the skull, crack it open, and extract the pink-grey goop inside. It smells awful. There's no way to sugarcoat this. You mix it with warm water, mash it into a paste, and start rubbing it into the hide. Every inch. Fold, massage, stretch. It's like moisturizing leather with a horror movie prop. But the fatty acids are doing critical work, coating the fibers, making them flexible, preserving them against rotten brittleness. Some trappers heated the brain mixture slightly, some kept it cold, some added smoke right away, some waited. Methods varied, but the goal was always the same: infuse the hide with something that would stop it from becoming stiff, useless rawhide. After a few hours of work, you wring it out, stretch it again, and then comes the final defining step: smoking. This is what turns a limp, brain-rubbed hide into real buckskin. You build a low fire with punky, smouldering wood, cottonwood, willow, or punky birch, then set up a teepee of sticks above it. You hang the hide inside like a jacket over a campfire, sealing the smoke in with bark, cloth, or moorhide if you've got it. The smoke flows through the fibers, staining them golden brown and locking in all your hard work. It also waterproofs the hide, well, mostly, and gives it that earthy, warm smell that clings to old buckskin jackets like history itself. The process can take a few hours or all day, depending on the size and your setup. You sit by the fire, flipping and rotating it slowly, watching it transform. The result? Soft, supple, warm even when wet, breathable, durable, the perfect frontier material. You can now turn it into leggings, moccasins, pouches, shirt panels, whatever your cold little heart desires. This was the go-to fabric before denim, before Gore-Tex, before anything remotely synthetic. Buckskin didn't just look cool on old maps and postage stamps, it worked. Now, here's a quirky detail. Some mountain men added personal touches to their buckskin. Fringes, beads, even carved buttons made from bone. The fringes weren't just decorative either, they helped shed rain by directing it away from the body. Form met function in every stitch. There's a scholarly debate about just how often frontiersmen did their own tanning. Some argue that most bought hides from native tribes, who had the process down to an art. Others suggest that solo trappers and isolated homesteaders had to learn it themselves or go without. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. If you were near trade routes, you bartered. If you weren't, you learned the messy, smelly way, and messy it is. By the end of the day, you smell like a haunted butcher shop. Your hands are stained, your sleeves are crusted with ash and brain paste. But when you hold up the finished hide to the light and see how it flexes, how it moves, you feel that quiet, satisfying thrum of pride. You took something dead and made it useful, beautiful even. That's the heart of frontier survival, turning the ugly into essential. As you hang the buckskin to cool and cure, you feel the weight of tradition settling over your shoulders like a warm cloak. You may not be wearing it yet, but it already belongs to you. One hide, one day, 1,000 years of skill in your hands. Not bad for a beginner. You're working with a handful of thorns, a wad of fibrous bark, and a growing sense of disbelief that this pile of garbage is supposed to turn into tools, or weapons, or anything useful. But here you are, diving headfirst into survival skill number 13, using plants as tools and weapons, the underappreciated art of not just living with nature, but turning it into your gear, your toolkit, and sometimes your last line of defense. Let's be real. Plants aren't the first thing you think of when you imagine hardcore survival. You picture knives, fire, maybe a rifle if you're lucky. But plants, leaves, twigs, you're not here to make a salad. You're here to not die. And that means learning to see plants not as background scenery, but as a shelf full of weird, wild, multi-tools. Every stem, root, and thorn is a possible solution, if you're willing to get your hands dirty and your expectations low. Start with stinging nettle. That's right. The plant that gave you a rash last week? It's actually one of the best wild fibers on the continent. You strip the outer layer from its stalk, soak it, and roll the fibers between your palms until they start to twist into cordage. Strong stuff too. You can lash together a shelter, make a snare, even braid it into fishing line if you've got the patience and low enough standards. It itches going in, sure, but once dried and stripped, it loses its sting and gains a second career as frontier duct tape. Then there's cattail. You find some near the marshy end of a stream, tall and proud like nature's hot dogs on sticks. The leaves peel off in long ribbons, perfect for weaving mats, baskets, or even makeshift sandals. The brown fluffy heads can be used as tinder or insulation, and the root, if you dig it up and roast it, is edible, kind of like a potato that went to a survivalist camp. Now let's talk weapons. You're not going full Rambo out here, but even humble plants can pack a punch. Ever heard of devil's walking stick? It's a spiny, nightmare-tier shrub covered in thorns sharp enough to pierce leather. You cut a staff from it, strip away the smaller twigs, and suddenly you've got a club that no one wants to grab. It was used for centuries by native tribes as a natural deterrent, and a not-so-subtle message that maybe you should walk away slowly and reconsider your life choices. For throwing weapons or traps, dogwood and hazel make great frame materials, flexible but strong. You can shape them into hoops, triggers, even the arms of a small bow. With patience, heat bending, and a lot of trial and error, you could even form a serviceable short bow from these woods, just enough to take down small game if your aim is steady and your standards aren't Olympic. Now for the surgical gear. You pull a thorn from a hawthorn tree hard and sharp as a needle and realize this could actually sew. Some early frontiersmen used long, stiff thorns with animal sinew as emergency sutures. Not sterile, not pleasant, but better than bleeding out. You can also use them as fishhooks in a pinch. Just carve a notch to catch the flesh and tie it to a length of nettle cord. Toss that into a quiet stream with a bit of worm or fat, and you've got a shot at dinner. It's not all useful, though. Some plants are just out here committing murder. You've got to know your poisons. Water hemlock, deadly, even in small doses. Looks like wild carrot. Smells kind of sweet. Eat it, and your organs stage a protest they don't plan to survive. Then there's nightshade, with its seductive berries that look like little grapes. Pop one in your mouth, and it's lights out in an hour. No dramatic symptoms, just a quiet goodbye. Quirky side fact. Some frontiersmen intentionally carried small bundles of poisonous plants, not to eat, but to use as pest deterrents. Crushed nightshade or hemlock leaves were smeared onto meat to keep scavengers away from cache supplies. It was a gamble, of course. If you forgot to wash your hands or someone found your stash and didn't know better, you had a bad time. But out here, keeping wolves and raccoons off your jerky sometimes meant playing a little fast and loose with natural biotoxins. And then there's the legendary tobacco tricks. Indigenous groups used wild tobacco not just for rituals, but also as an insect repellent, wound dressing, and even as bait, mixed into traps to attract curious animals. Nicotine in the wild is a chemical weapon on a microscale. The early trappers who paid attention learned this fast. The ones who didn't, let's just say they were itchy and full of regrets. Scholars still argue how much of this knowledge was truly frontier skill versus cultural borrowing from native tribes. The answer, again, is somewhere in the muddy middle. Indigenous people had thousands of years of plant lore, passed orally, tested over generations. European settlers came with books, superstition, and a willingness to experiment. When the two worlds collided, some knowledge was shared, some stolen, and much of it misunderstood. The result? A weird patchwork botanical survival guide carved into memory, bark, and occasionally someone's gravestone. Back in your camp, you now have a neat little collection laid out on a flat rock. Nettle cord, cattail cordage, thorns as fish hooks, and a decent-looking hardwood sapling bent into a bow frame. You're starting to feel like a walking episode of primitive Pinterest. But the real shift isn't in your gear, it's in how you see the forest, where once you saw just leaves and sticks, you now see potential. A branch isn't a branch anymore, it's a snare trigger. A vine is rope, a thistle is a needle, and a flower might be food, medicine, or poison, depending on how well you've paid attention. You haven't turned into a herbalist warrior monk overnight, but now you understand something deeper. Survival isn't always about fighting nature. Sometimes it's about shaking hands with it, thorns and all, and figuring out how to make it your unlikely ally. You're staring at a wide river now, mud-brown, fast-moving, cold enough to numb your hands within seconds. There's no bridge, no shallow crossing, and no path around. The bank on your side is steep and root-choked. The far side, a gently sloping meadow that might as well be heaven. You have to get across, and swimming's not an option unless you've got a death wish and a craving for hypothermia. So, what's the plan? Easy. Survival skill number 14. Emergency raft building, also known as hope it floats and pray you don't. You take stock of what you've got. Cordage made from nettle fibres, a hatchet, and enough raw nerves to consider tying yourself to a floating log like some kind of budget Robinson Crusoe. The good news? You're surrounded by trees. The bad news? Most of them are still rooted in the ground, so you begin the slow, ugly business of scavenging. You look for deadfall first, already downed trees, mostly dry, still solid. Waterlogged logs are too heavy, too unstable. You find a few that are short and thick, maybe 6 feet long, and start dragging them to the riverbank. Birch is decent. Cedar's better if you can find it. Light, buoyant, and rot-resistant. You also collect green saplings for the frame, and long, pliable branches for lashing. Building a raft isn't delicate work. It's more like a bar brawl between you and gravity. You lay the biggest logs side by side, then start lashing cross pieces perpendicular with your cordage. Tight knots, wrap, twist, repeat. You test the frame by sitting on it, and it sinks just enough to make you question your life choices. You add more flotation, spacing smaller logs underneath like pontoons. At this point, you're already soaked from the waist down. Your arms are covered in sap and you've lost track of time. Still, you're getting somewhere. The raft begins to hold its shape. Not elegant but serviceable. You wedge sharpened stakes into the lashings to keep the logs from rolling out of place. Every frontier journal you've ever read warned about rafters roll, when your float decides to turn into a log treadmill mid-river and toss you off like a bad carnival ride. Now comes the real challenge: navigation. You grab a thick branch, carve it into a crude paddle, and test your strength. It's barely better than doggy paddling with a spoon, but it beats jumping in naked. You tie your pack to the raft, double-check your lashings, and prepare to launch. You hesitate, because history is filled with people who thought, this'll hold. Some frontiersmen floated entire carts and horses across rivers using makeshift rafts, ox bladders, and inflated hides. Others drowned less than 10 feet from shore because they tied their supplies too high and shifted the raft's centre of gravity. One trapper's journal famously ends mid-sentence after describing his attempt to cross the Missouri on a raft made of buffalo ribs. Not encouraging. You push off. The water grabs the raft like a jealous lover, sudden and demanding. You paddle hard, angling across the current instead of against it. The river fights you, spinning the raft slightly, threatening to broadside. You crouch low, trying to keep your weight centred. Cold spray slaps your face. You paddle harder. Halfway across, the raft wobbles. One of the lashings creaks. For a terrifying second, you think it's coming apart, but it holds, barely. You hit a patch of calmer water, angle the nose toward the opposite bank, and dig deep. The river slows just enough to let you drift in close. Your raft bumps the shore like a drunk goat, and you leap off into knee-deep muck, dragging it behind you like a dead beast. You're wet, cold, and shaking with exhaustion, but you made it. This isn't just a frontier party trick. Raft building was a vital skill for trappers, explorers, and traders. Rivers were both highways and obstacles. They carried you to furs, to fish, to safety, but they also stood in your way, daring you to outthink them. Lewis and Clark crossed more rivers than roads, and their survival often came down to who could build a decent float on short notice. And here's a fun, oddball detail. Some frontiersmen packed pig bladders or inflated animal skins as portable flotation devices. Inflate a few, lash them to a frame, and boom, you've got a frontier water wing. Not pretty, and definitely not vegan, but effective. There's even a bit of debate among wilderness historians about whether the classic log raft was practical or just cinematic. Some argue that real-life rafts were smaller, tighter, more like boats made from bark and sinew than floating death traps. Others maintain that people routinely floated on lashed logs, especially in regions thick with timber and short on tools. The truth: it depends on desperation and creativity. Two things frontiersmen never ran out of. You look back at your raft, now sagging on the bank, soaked and sagging but intact. You want to abandon it, but you hesitate. Maybe you'll need it again. So you pull it up onto the shore and wedge it under some brush, mark the spot with a cairn, just in case. Your boots squish as you walk inland. The meadow ahead is soft with grass and dotted with wildflowers. It looks gentle, safe, but you know better now. That river wasn't a barrier, it was a test, and you passed. You're not an engineer, you're not an Eagle Scout, but you built something that worked, with your hands and sweat and pure animal stubbornness. You crossed where most people would have turned back, and next time, it'll be better. Tighter lashings, better logs, maybe a sail if you're feeling bold, but for now, you're dry, you're on solid ground, and you're not on the wrong side of the river anymore. You haven't seen a single deer in 3 days. No fresh sign, no tracks, no scat. Nothing but the occasional mocking squirrel and birds that seem to chirp, "Nice try," every time you walk by. Hunger's setting in again, the kind that makes your hands shake a little when you reach into your pack, only to remember there's nothing in it but pine needles and hope. So now you switch tactics. No rifle, no bow, just cordage, hooks, and patience. It's time for survival skill number 15. Snares, hooks, and fishing without a rod, or more bluntly, catching dinner with whatever sharp objects you can tie to a stick. You start with the basics. Snares. You've read about them, seen diagrams etched in the margins of old survival books, but nothing beats getting your hands dirty. You find a narrow game trail, barely more than a tunnel in the underbrush, just wide enough for a rabbit or squirrel to squeeze through. Perfect. You take a length of twisted nettle cordage and tie a simple loop. Then, using a forked stick, you prop the noose at rabbit head height, anchoring the ends to a sapling with just enough tension to snap it shut if triggered. Now you wait. Not right there, of course. Animals know when they're being watched. You set 5 more along similar trails varying the design. Spring snares, fixed loop, and 1 deadfall with a baited trigger made from a sharpened twig and false confidence. You've begun to understand that the secret isn't complexity, it's placement. The old trappers used to say, a poor trap in the right spot will feed you before a perfect trap in the wrong one. And out here, that checks out. Next, you pivot to fishing. The stream you crossed earlier loops through the lowlands below your new camp, gurgling with the kind of sound that should promise trout. You fashion a simple gorge hook from a thorn and a bit of bone, carved into a slender bar, sharpened at both ends. You notch the middle and tie it tight to your cord. When swallowed, it turns sideways in the fish's throat. Brutal? Yes. Effective? Also yes. You bait the hook with a grub, plucked from under a rotten log, and toss the line gently into a calm eddy behind a rock. You tie the other end to a branch stuck into the mud. No casting, no reel, just set and forget. Then you build a weir. It's a time-intensive project, but if you're staying here for a day or two, it's worth it. You gather stones and pile them in a crescent across a shallow section of the stream, narrowing the opening to a fish-sized gap. Water flows through, but fish get confused, especially when chased. You guide them in with noise, or sometimes wait for one to drift in on its own and then block the exit. Crude, but effective. It's fishing for introverts. The waiting begins, and the doubt. You check your snares first. One is triggered but empty. Something brushed it maybe, or a squirrel decided to play games. Another is untouched, but the third movement. You approach slowly. A rabbit, caught cleanly around the neck, already still. Guilt hits fast, but so does the relief. Meat. You kneel, thank the animal under your breath, and reset the snare. A few hours later, the deadfall has delivered 2. Another rabbit, smaller but just as appreciated. Back at the stream, you check your line. It's gone taut. You pull it gently, heart skipping. Resistance. A fish, wriggling, fighting. You haul it in. Not a monster, maybe 10 inches, but it's protein. Dinner. You reset the line, bait another hook, and smile like you just won the lottery. Because out here, you did. There's a raw satisfaction in this kind of success. You didn't use a rod. No fancy lures. No reel. No net. Just sharp sticks, grit, and observation. It's primal, but also meditative. You're not chasing your food anymore. You're luring it, waiting for it to find you. That shift changes everything. It's no longer about running through the woods in desperation. It's about slowing down, placing traps, and letting nature do the heavy lifting. There's even a strange kind of craftsmanship to it. You find yourself improving your hooks, smoothing the bone, reshaping the thorns. You start hiding your snares better, weaving in leaves and dirt so they blend seamlessly with the trail. You're not just trapping now, you're learning. Frontier trappers use these same techniques with minor tweaks. Some tied trip snares along logs, where martins or raccoons would scamper. Others set up figure-4 deadfalls with precise trigger mechanics and small pieces of bait. Dried berries, bits of fish, even shiny objects. Some carried folding traps in their packs, but many relied on what the land gave them. It wasn't glamorous, it was efficient. Quirky fact, some early explorers used fish as bait for other animals. Lay a gutted trout on a flat rock and wait for scavengers, foxes, weasels, even mink to show up. Then you trigger a snare or drop a net from above. It sounds absurd, but in lean times the fish you caught in the morning might become the bait for the meat you need at night. Recycling frontier style. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how much of this trapping skill came from native influence versus trial and error by settlers. Most agree native peoples had refined these methods for generations, with more humane and often more effective systems. Early trappers borrowed heavily, some respectfully, others not. But what stuck was the principle. Patience, precision, placement. You clean your fish by the stream, guts floating downstream as the sun dips low. The rabbits are skinned, their hides set aside for possible tanning, their meat already sizzling over a small fire. The smell makes your stomach twist in the best way. It's not gourmet, but it's earned. Dinner is silent, reverent. You eat slowly, chewing each bite like it's a secret you're trying to savor. You haven't had a meal this satisfying in days. You didn't chase it down. You laid the groundwork, waited, and the forest delivered. That's what trapping is in the end. Less about violence, more about patience. Less hunter, more strategist. You lean back on your elbows, full for the first time in what feels like forever, watching the last light catch the curve of the stream. Insects buzz, leaves whisper. You set traps not just to catch animals, but to catch time and possibility, and right now, you caught both. You wake up to a sound you don't quite recognize at first. Total silence. Not the usual rustle of trees, not birdsong or trickling water, just the soft crunch of your own breath freezing in midair. You sit up slowly, stiff from cold, and immediately notice that everything has changed. Snow. A fine dusting covers the ground, your gear, your boots. The world is suddenly white and still, like the forest took a deep breath overnight and exhaled winter. Welcome to survival skill number 16, Snow Survival Tactics, where everything you know about staying alive shifts the moment your breath fogs and your fingers stop listening. You're not just cold, you're losing heat. Fast. Snow doesn't feel dangerous at first, just inconvenient, maybe even beautiful. But that's a trap. Cold drains energy faster than hunger or thirst. It makes you clumsy. It makes you careless. And if you let it, it will tuck you in for a nap you'll never wake up from. So first rule, stay dry. Moisture is the enemy now. You shake the snow from your blanket and check your clothes. Your boots are damp. Bad. You kick off the frost and stuff dry moss inside to help wick moisture away from your socks. If your feet freeze, you're not walking anywhere. You hang your wet gear near your body under your coat, not because it's comfortable, but because your own heat is now your only dryer. Next step, insulation. Your lean-to worked in the rain, but snow's a different beast. You start packing snow around the base of your shelter, not to keep it out, but to trap heat inside. Sounds backwards, but snow is a surprisingly good insulator when it's compacted. You pile branches against the sides and then snow on top, creating a thicker wall. Inside it's dark, a little cramped, but warmer than outside by a good few degrees. This is your snow coffin, and yes, that's a real term. Congratulations, you're now sleeping in a cold, damp tomb. That might just keep you alive. You need a fire, but smoke's a liability in calm winter air. It hangs low, obvious, and might draw attention you don't want, human or otherwise. So you go stealth mode, Dakota fire hole. You dig 2 small holes a few feet apart, one for the fire, the other for airflow, connected underground by a small tunnel. You build a small contained blaze below the surface. It's windproof, low smoke, and easy to cover fast if needed. You drop a few chunks of rabbit meat into your tin cup and set it on the hot rocks. Boiled meat and bone broth, frontier stew. Not fancy, but warm enough to pull you back from the edge. Now you plan your movements. Snow turns everything into a tactical mess. Walking in deep snow is exhausting, each step a workout. So you make snowshoes. You gather flexible branches, bend them into ovals, and lash them with sinew and bark strips across the frame in a crisscross pattern. Not high performance gear, but enough to spread your weight and keep you from sinking up to your hips. You tie them to your boots, stand, and test them. Crunch, crunch, success. Your goal today? Not food, not water, shelter and warmth. That's the entire mission. You start collecting pine boughs, layers and layers of them. You build a bed, thick enough to lift you off the ground and hold your heat. Then you gather dry sticks, not from the snow-covered ground, but broken dead limbs still hanging in the trees. Those are dry. Those will burn. You carry them like sacred artifacts. Quirky fact, some old trappers used to carry hot stones in their packs, pulled from fires, wrapped in cloth, and tucked into bedrolls to act like prehistoric heating pads. You try the same, heating rocks near your fire and placing them at the foot of your bedding. It works better than you'd expect, the radiant heat soaking into your legs and keeping the chill at bay. By afternoon, the sun is pale and low, barely bothering to climb into the sky. You keep moving, because movement is life. Stop too long, and the cold wraps around you like a wet rope. You chop through ice to reach water, taking care not to let it freeze the second you pour it. Your breath hangs thick. Your fingers sting. You stop often to clench your hands into fists and restore circulation. Here's a controversial one. Eating snow. It's tempting. Clean, crisp, easy to scoop. But old survival manuals warn against it. Not because it's dirty, but because it costs body heat to melt. Every handful of snow you eat steals calories and warmth. Better to melt it over a fire or in a metal cup kept near your chest. Scholars debate whether most frontiersmen were actually prepared for snow survival, or if they mostly just powered through on luck and layered buckskin. The evidence is mixed. Some accounts describe elaborate snow camps with windbreaks, insulated shelters, and smudge fires. Others describe frostbitten feet, frozen fingers, and men who simply walked until they dropped. Survival came down to experience and adaptability. The forest, as always, didn't care. Some of the most efficient winter survivors were indigenous peoples, Inuit, Cree, Ojibwe, who built snow shelters with superior insulation and knew how to read the snow's texture like a book. Frontiersmen who paid attention survived. Those who didn't, well, the forest has a long memory and short patience. By evening, your breath has stopped hurting, which is either good or very bad. Your fire still burns low in the Dakota pit, and your snow shelter holds the warmth like a secret. You curl onto your pine bed, rocks at your feet, cup in your hands. The wind howls outside, snow taps against your walls like distant fingers. But inside? Inside you've made peace with the cold, not conquered it, not beaten it, just understood it. You lie back, body steaming in the darkness, and fall asleep wrapped in the quiet terror of snow and the quiet pride of surviving another night. The snow has stopped. The sun, low and sleepy, throws long golden shadows across the forest floor, making everything sparkle like a Christmas card from a place that wants you dead. You crunch through the powder, eyes scanning left and right, not for predators this time, but for salad, or bark, or edible roots. It's not glamorous, but welcome to survival skill number 17, foraging in all 4 seasons. Because whether it's spring green or winter grey, the forest always offers food. You just have to know where to look, what not to touch, and when to swallow your pride along with a handful of cattail. The trick to foraging is simple: don't die. That sounds obvious, but edible plants and poisonous ones often look like siblings with very different opinions about your existence. One wrong nibble and you're hallucinating your way into a pine tree. So the first rule of foraging: if you're not sure, leave it alone. That said, once you know what you're doing, the forest becomes a buffet for the broken and hungry. You start with cattails, nature's survival miracle. Even under a crust of ice, you can dig into the muck near shallow water and pull up the rhizomes, the thick, starchy roots. You slice one open with your belt knife and chew the raw white pulp inside. It tastes like damp nothing, but it's filling. In spring and summer, the green shoots are edible raw, and the brown flower heads can be roasted like corn cobs. But today, it's root stew or bust. Then there's pine trees, which are somehow both shelter, kindling, and soup ingredients. You collect some green needles, crush them between your fingers, and drop them into boiling water. Pine needle tea, loaded with vitamin C, it's sharp, citrusy, and the only thing standing between you and scurvy right now. Just make sure you're not brewing needles from a yew tree, which looks similar and will absolutely kill you with a single bitter sip. As you walk deeper into the woods, you spot birch bark, thin and papery, curling in pale scrolls. The inner bark, not the flaky stuff, can be scraped and boiled. It's fibrous, chewy, and tastes like you imagine a paperback novel might, but it'll give you some calories. Plus, birch sap in spring can be tapped and drunk straight. Cool, sweet, and better than anything in a bottle. In summer, foraging's a whole different game. You can find berries, blackberries, raspberries, elderberries, tart and sun-warmed, bursting with sugar and hydration. But even those come with caveats. Nightshade looks an awful lot like edible berries if you're not paying attention, so you don't. You slow down. You check every plant like it's a test you don't want to fail. Then there's wild onions and garlic. Smell before you eat. If it smells like onion, you're probably safe. If it doesn't, put it back. You remember a story of a trapper who ate a full bulb of false hellebore thinking it was wild garlic. He lasted 2 hours. That's the thing about foraging. It's not about abundance. It's about precision. In fall, the forest shifts again. Now it's about nuts and roots. You find a few acorns under the snow. Bitter raw, but edible if you leach the tannins out. A long, boring process of boiling and soaking and waiting, but the resulting meal is protein-rich and stable. The early settlers used them in bread, mash, even pemmican when meat was scarce. You toss a few into your pouch for later. Hickory nuts are better if you can crack them. Same for black walnuts, though those are hard enough to break a tooth in your resolve. You pass a beech tree and find a few last beech nuts tucked into the leaf litter. Jackpot. Tiny, yes, but high in fat. You crush them with a rock and nibble the soft meat inside. It's sweet, rich, real food. But the king of winter foraging? Inner bark. Not romantic, but effective. You can strip it from willow, poplar and aspen trees in thin sheets and boil it into a paste. Not exactly a gourmet experience, but it contains carbs and keeps your gut moving. Indigenous tribes called it starvation food, not because it was poison, but because you only ate it when all your other options were dead, frozen, or walked away on hooves. Then there are fungi, dangerous territory. Mushrooms are high reward, high risk, some delicious, some fatal, and a terrifying number in between. You spot a clump of turkey tail on a dead log, fan-shaped, multicoloured. Too tough to eat raw, but steeped into tea, it's a powerful immune booster. Historically used in both indigenous and Chinese medicine, it's not going to fill your belly, but it might keep you alive longer. And let's not forget grubs and insects. Technically not plants, but they count in a desperation diet. Peel back the bark on a rotting log and sure enough, a fat white grub curls away from the light. You hold it up, wiggles, protein. No thanks, but yes, you eat it. The taste is nutty, the texture is crime. Quirky fact. Some frontiersmen believed you could taste test plants by rubbing them on your skin, then lips, then tongue, waiting hours between steps. It was part science, part superstition. Did it work? Sometimes. Did it also kill people? Absolutely. You're better off learning the actual botany or just not taking dumb chances with plants that might melt your liver from the inside. There's scholarly disagreement over just how well settlers foraged. Some claim they were hopeless, relying entirely on stored supplies and dumb luck. Others point to journals full of plant-based remedies, edible lists and foraging routes. The truth is probably regional. In fertile areas with native guides, they ate well. In barren, unfamiliar terrain, they starved creatively. You sit now beside your fire, chewing boiled cattail and sipping pine tea. Not a feast, not even comfort, but enough. You're still here, still upright, still part of the ecosystem in a strange gnawing sort of way. You used to walk past trees without knowing their names. Now they feed you. You used to see weeds. Now you see calories. The forest hasn't changed. You have. Your world right now is falling apart, literally. The cord binding your pack just snapped. Again. One sharp tug climbing over a fallen tree, and now your gear's halfway scattered across the snow like a survivalist garage sale. The rawhide tie you used yesterday, frozen stiff and crumbling. You stare down at the mess and sigh. You're not even mad. You're just tired. Because it turns out that without nails, glue or duct tape, everything eventually breaks. So welcome to survival skill number 18, making cordage from nothing, the unsung miracle that holds the entire frontier together, sometimes with grass, sometimes with bark, and sometimes with actual human hair. Cordage is one of those things you never think about until you don't have it. But out here, it's everything. It's shelter, it's tools, it's traps, it's the difference between wearing your gear and dragging it behind you in shame. And the best part? Nature provides, if you know where to look and don't mind hours of repetitive finger-numbing labour. You start simple. Grass. Not all grasses work, but the long, fibrous kinds, especially dry prairie grass or cattail leaves, can be twisted into surprisingly strong twine. You grab a handful, strip the leaves lengthwise and start the reverse wrap twist, a method used by just about every ancient culture with access to plants and too much time on their hands. Twist one strand clockwise, then wrap it counterclockwise over another. Keep going, like you're braiding with just 2 strands and no end in sight. It takes time, sure, but you're building something. You make a foot-long length, then another and another. Soon you've got a small coil of tough grassy cord that can hold up your tarp, tie a bundle, or become part of a snare trigger. Feeling bold, you move on to inner bark. You strip a few lengths from a nearby basswood tree, careful not to wring the trunk. You want the tree to live. The inner bark or bast is flexible and fibrous when soaked. You drop it in your water pot and let it sit for a few hours. When you pull it out, it peels into soft ribbons which you twist like before, watching the fibres lock into a surprisingly strong cord. Want something sturdier? Go prehistoric. Dogbane and milkweed are top-tier survival plants. Their stalks, once dried and split, give fibres as strong as commercial string. Native peoples used them for bowstrings, fishing line, even sewing thread. You harvest a few milkweed stalks, dry, brittle, standing like skeletons in the snow. You crack them open, strip the inner fibres, and roll them on your thigh until they twist into a thread so strong it's kind of insulting to modern manufacturing. Now here's where it gets weird. Sinew, as in animal tendons. If you've ever dressed a deer or rabbit, you've seen it. The shiny, silvery threads running along the muscles and down the legs. You scrape it out, dry it, pound it flat, and then peel it into strips. Once softened, it turns into incredibly durable, flexible thread. Frontier trappers used it to sew leather, repair moccasins, and even fletch arrows. You try not to think about what part of the animal it came from as you tie your pack closed with a piece. It holds. Better than rawhide. And yes, human hair. Let's not pretend. Some trappers use their own hair, or someone else's, to tie things in a pinch. It's strong, flexible, and endlessly renewable, unless you go bald. Not great for long lengths, but for sewing up a busted pack strap or securing a knife sheath. Surprisingly effective. You start to see cordage everywhere. Every tree, every plant, every dry weed becomes potential rope. You twist willow bark, you split nettle stalks, you pull dried rootlets from exposed soil and test their strength. You braid 3 strands into a thicker line, then splice them together into a coil strong enough to hang food from a tree or even make a primitive bowstring. The options expand the more you look. Cordage wasn't just essential, it was civilization. Archaeologists have found 10,000-year-old rope fragments, showing that even our most ancient ancestors couldn't function without it. It's the first step from guy with sharp rock to guy with complex trap system and backup plan. Every frontier camp, native village, and explorer's kit had cordage at the core. There's an open debate among scholars about how much cordage was carried versus made on the fly. Some argue trappers travelled with massive coils of rope and sinew, while others suggest they made what they needed daily, based on the materials around them. Journals describe both. A few mention making string by moonlight, which either means they were in a rush, or romanticising the fact that they hadn't eaten in 2 days and needed to hang a snare. Quirky side note, the survival bracelet. You know, those paracord wristbands? They're a modern nod to an ancient idea. Frontiersmen sometimes wore small braids of sinew or fibre around their wrists or necks, not for fashion, but because it kept emergency cordage always within reach. Utility disguised as jewellery, ahead of their time. By late afternoon, your fingers are stiff, but your pack is fixed. You've reinforced the straps with bark cord, created a spare snare loop, and even started weaving a small net bag to hang from your belt. You tie your cooking tin with milkweed thread and watch it swing gently at your side. Not bad for a pile of weeds and good intentions. That night, by the fire, you test your lines. The bark cord holds. The grass twine creaks but doesn't snap. The sinew, like steel wire, only smellier. You lean back, proud in that quiet, primitive way, like someone who didn't just survive but adapted. You used to think rope was rope. Now you know better. Rope is everywhere, if you're willing to twist it. You're standing in a clearing now looking down at a spot where you buried something 2 weeks ago. You can't see a single sign of it. No disturbed soil, no marker, no bent grass. Which is good, because if you can't find it easily, chances are no wandering bear, desperate drifter, or rainstorm did either. You kneel, feel along the ground, and after a moment of quiet digging, your fingers strike something solid. Oilcloth. You peel back the earth slowly, like you're unwrapping treasure. And in a way you are. This is the cache, your little secret. Welcome to survival skill number 19, the caching game, or how to hide your lifeline in the woods and hope you're not too stupid to find it again later. Caching is part insurance policy, part time capsule, part trust fall with the wilderness. Frontiersmen used caches all the time, especially fur trappers, who'd stash pelts to lighten their loads while they hunted deeper. Others buried food, powder, tools, or spare clothes to come back to months, or even years, later. The trick: bury it well, mark it better, and never put all your hope in a single hiding spot. You pull the oilcloth bundle free and unroll it. Inside, a bit of jerky, some fish hooks, a spare flint, and, miracle of miracles, dry socks. You hold them like they're spun from golden angels. They don't even smell like despair. You swap them out immediately, wiggling your frozen toes and savouring that rare wilderness luxury, comfort. But now you're thinking long term. You'll be moving again soon, so it's time to make a new cache. You hike a mile off your current trail into terrain that's just confusing enough to be secure, but familiar enough that you might recognise it again. You find a cluster of birches near a crooked rock that looks vaguely like a turtle, a natural marker. Perfect. You dig a hole, not straight down but at a slant so water drains out instead of pooling in. about 2 feet deep, just wide enough for your oilcloth bundle. You lay down a layer of bark to keep it off the wet soil, then tuck in your stash: a bit of pemmican, a wrapped tinder bundle, spare cordage, a crude fishing line, a bone needle. Nothing extravagant, just enough. You wrap it tightly in oilcloth, then again in a layer of pitch-sealed bark, just like the old trappers used to. You want it waterproof, animal-proof, and time-proof. You bury it, pack the soil, brush leaves and debris back over the top, and then, the most important part, you make your mark. Not a giant X, not a carved skull, just a broken twig, angled exactly due east. Then, 20 paces away, you bend a sapling into a gentle arc, tie it with grass. Your breadcrumb trail. Subtle, forgettable, unless you're looking. Frontiersmen had to get creative with their cache markers. Some used rock cairns that looked like natural formations. Others made tiny cuts in tree bark, just enough to hint at something. One famous trapper supposedly notched trees in Morse code patterns, though that might have been more brag than truth. What is true is that caching was essential to long-range survival. You couldn't carry everything, but if you could stash it and trust it to stay hidden, that was power. There's a frontier legend of a trapper who buried 4 separate caches across a 100-mile trap line. Every season he'd return and find them untouched, until one year, one was gone. No signs of disturbance, no tracks, just gone. Some say he forgot where he buried it. Others say someone followed him, learned his marks, or maybe nature itself just swallowed it. Because sometimes that happens too. You think about that as you double-check your spot. What if you forget? What if the turtle-shaped rock erodes or the birches fall in a storm? That's where mental mapping comes in. You don't just memorize the location, you anchor it. You walk away repeating it in your head like a chant. Turtle rock, birch trio, 20 steps east, bent sapling, buried slant. Again and again. Burn it in. Scholars debate whether frontiersmen were really that good at memory-based navigation or just lucky. But the journals don't lie. Many returned to caches months later and found them precisely where expected. Some even mapped them using rudimentary symbols or kept ledgers with secret coordinates. Others trusted their minds alone, which worked, until it didn't. You find a second location just in case. Backup for your backup. A hollow stump dry inside. You tuck a tinder bundle and a single wrapped ration of smoked fish in there, sealed in bark and pine sap. Nothing fancy. Just enough to matter when it really, really matters. Quirky fact. Some trappers left notes in their caches, scraps of birch bark with messages for future selves or others in their camp. If you're reading this, take what you need. Sometimes just initials and a date, sometimes prayers, sometimes warnings. You think about doing the same, scratching your mark into the inside of the oilcloth. Not a full letter, just a symbol, a whisper to the future version of you who might be stumbling through here, hungry and tired, praying for a miracle. The great thing about caching is that it buys you margin. In a world where every step could go wrong, injury, storm, lost gear, a cache gives you a little breathing room, a second chance, a way to retrace your path and find help you gave yourself. It's a breadcrumb trail that's less about escape and more about survival. As the sun sinks behind the pines, you walk away from the spot, eyes scanning the brush to see if you left a trail. You don't think so. You hope not. You feel a little like a pirate, a little like a time traveler, planting a gift in the soil for someone who might not exist yet. But you do exist, and you'll remember. And if you don't, well, then the forest gets a free gift. But for now, you've tucked your hope into the ground, sealed it in bark, and walked away. That's survival. That's caching. That's trust in the one person who might just come back here someday. Night falls fast in the woods, like someone dropped a curtain over the world. You used to watch sunsets. Now you watch shadows stretch long and lean, curling around trees like silent hands. And with darkness comes your oldest enemy, visibility. Not just what you can't see, but what others might. If someone, or something, is looking for you, that little glow from your fire is a beacon. So tonight, you practice survival skill number 20, keeping fires hidden, the delicate art of staying warm without becoming a neon eat me sign in the forest. You don't just need heat, you need stealth. The wilderness isn't all empty space. Sometimes you're not alone. Could be a rival trapper, a desperate wanderer, or something four-legged with teeth and no patience for your bedtime routine. Frontiersmen learned quickly, fire saves your life, but it can also end it if handled carelessly. So, the goal? Concealment. You start with a smokeless fire pit, sometimes called a trapper's fire. First, you dig a small pit, shallow, just deep enough to nestle the flames below ground. Then, about a foot to the side, you dig a second hole, connected to the first by a narrow tunnel. That's your Dakota fire hole, a brilliant bit of low-tech engineering passed around by scouts and native peoples who understood fire was heat and signal. The air flows in through one hole, feeds the fire, and carries smoke straight down and out in such a thin line it vanishes almost immediately. Not perfect, but 1,000 times safer. You collect dry wood only. That's rule number 1. Wet wood smokes like it's trying to announce your presence to the next zip code. So you dig through deadfall, peel back dry bark, snap off bone-dry twigs from still-standing dead trees. If it snaps loud, it burns clean. If it bends, you toss it. You kneel by your pit, stack your fuel small, twig size, not logs. This is not a bonfire, it's a whisper. You strike a spark into your tinder bundle, dried cattail fluff and shredded bark, and coax it gently to life. The flame blooms low and hot, just enough to boil water or warm your hands. You shield it with your body. You learn to cook in silence, eat in darkness. And here's the other trick. Use a reflector. You find a flat rock and prop it behind the fire on the windward side. It reflects heat back toward you and helps block the flame from certain angles. In a pinch, a wall of logs or packed dirt will do the same. Some frontiersmen built full dugout hearths, almost like trenches, where they could lie prone beside the coals and remain invisible to anything more than 10 feet away. When it's time to sleep, you bank your fire. That means covering the coals with ash and embers so they stay warm but don't flame. Come morning, you can stir them back to life with a breath and a bit of tinder. No need to start from scratch. It's like setting your heat on low and hitting pause. There's a curious little trick you test for yourself. Under rock cooking. You dig a shallow hole, line it with stones, build a fire on top of them, then let it burn down until the rocks are white hot. Then you place food, wrapped in bark, leaves or hide, on the stones, cover it all with dirt, and let the heat slow cook it underground. No smoke, no flame, just steam and patience. You cook a rabbit this way, and when you dig it up an hour later, the meat falls apart like it wants to be eaten. Best part? No smell wafting into the wind, just you and your silent feast. Now, not all frontiersmen were subtle. Some lit fires like they were signalling the heavens, but the ones who lived, the solo trappers, the scouts, the ones crossing hostile or unknown territory, they learned how to hide their heat. Some even carried fire pans, metal trays they'd use to light fires above ground without burning the earth, so no trace was left behind. When done, they'd dump the ashes into a stream, erase the coals, scatter the site, ghosts with warm feet. Of course, there's a debate. Did everyone out there really practice fire concealment, or are we reading too much into a few clever journals? Some historians argue that in deep wilderness, visibility wasn't a problem. If you were 50 miles from the nearest human, who cares if your fire could be seen? Others counter that most of the wilderness wasn't empty. It was shared land, watched by eyes that didn't need your permission to move closer, better safe than scouted. A strange footnote from the fur trade era. Some voyageurs preferred no fires at all. They'd wrap hot rocks in blankets before sleeping or huddle in groups like human burritos. Fires were a luxury, not always worth the risk. And then there's the old trick of grease lamps. A small bowl of animal fat with a wick made from twisted moss or plant fibre. It burned low and slow, just enough for light, with barely a wisp of smoke. Like carrying a star in your hands. You sit now beside your hidden fire, half buried in the earth, shielded by stone. The light barely escapes past your knees. You sip pine tea from your tin, chewing a scrap of roasted meat, listening. The woods are quiet again. Whatever watches, if anything, hasn't seen you. You think about how this skill isn't just about survival. It's about intention. Staying small, staying silent, choosing when to be visible. It's not about fear, it's about control. You can still hear the crackle of flames, but now they don't scream. They whisper. You haven't made a sound in hours. Not because you're trying to be dramatic, but because, in the dense, damp silence of the forest, every sound becomes a confession. A twig snap is a warning shot. A rustle could be dinner or danger. Even your breathing feels loud, like you're blowing through a foghorn with every exhale. That's why today is all about survival skill number 21, wilderness stealth and camouflage, the ancient art of becoming invisible without disappearing. You're not here to perform a magic trick. This isn't fantasy. You're not cloaking yourself in shadows and whispering to wolves. You're just learning how to move like you belong here. Because if the forest sees you coming, so does everything that lives in it, and everything that might want to eat you, rob you, or just scare the soul out of your boots for fun. So first things first, slow down, like way down. You crouch low, weight centered, and place your foot heel first, then roll it forward, feeling for twigs before you shift your weight. You move inches at a time, not feet. You stop every few steps and listen, really listen, not just for sounds, but for what's missing. When the birds stop chirping, that's not peace. That's a red flag. You practice breathing through your nose, shallow and silent. Mouth breathing is louder than you think, and it fogs up your vision if you're in the cold. You pull your scarf up and press your tongue to the roof of your mouth. An old scout trick to regulate breath and reduce noise. Now for your body. That jacket you love, too shiny. You smear it with mud and crushed charcoal, dulling the colour, muting the scent. You do the same with your face and hands, especially your fingers, which catch the light like pale flags when you're not careful. You rub in crushed pine needles for scent cover. It's not deodorant, but it sure beats the raw human smell of sweat and fear. You gather moss and fern and tuck it into your shoulders, your belt, your boots, not to hide like a cartoon swamp monster, but to break up your outline. That's the secret to real camouflage, shape disruption. Predators don't just look for colour, they look for the vertical lines of a human body, the distinct motion of a bipedal silhouette. Your job? Become not that. You test it by hiding at the base of a fir tree, wrapping your cloak tight and pressing into the shadow. The deer walks within 20 yards before it notices something's off. One flick of its ear and it vanishes like smoke. But you held still. You were close. Frontiersmen use these tactics for hunting, but also for evasion. Outlaws, rival trappers, hostile groups, all part of the equation. They learned how to walk with the wind, how to keep their shadow out of sight, how to time their steps with the rhythm of the forest. A bird call here, a creaking branch there, that's your cover sound. You move with the noise, not against it. And when you really need to vanish, you go below the eye line. You belly crawl if you have to. Use creek beds, hug rock walls. In heavy fog or rain, you move. In moonlight, you don't. You even practice breathing through a reed. Yes, like in old movies, just in case you need to lie in a marsh, hidden in muck, watching someone pass feet away. Is it overkill? Maybe. Is it excessive? Absolutely. But the moment you need it, stealth isn't a luxury. It's the only thing keeping you out of a shallow hole. Here's the weird historical bit. Some trappers took stealth to artistic levels. One journal describes a man who wore a deer-hide cloak complete with antlers and crawled on all fours to stalk elk. Another recounts a scout who painted his entire body in ash and ochre, claiming it kept insects away and made the forest forget I was there. Creepy, definitely, but it worked. Native tribes were the true masters of wilderness stealth. Many had entire systems of silent signals, hand gestures, bird calls, directional sticks. They could travel in groups and still move like wind through tall grass. Frontiersmen who learned from them often outlived those who didn't. There's a scholarly debate about how realistic these stories are. Could someone really lie motionless in the woods for hours without being seen? Could a man wrapped in moss and hide trick a herd of elk? Some say yes, pointing to trained snipers, indigenous tracking traditions, and modern survivalists who replicate these feats today. Others think it's romanticism, exaggerated tales told around fires to impress and intimidate. But you're out here now, and it doesn't feel like fantasy. It feels like necessity. You start building a ghillie cloak, not full-blown military grade, but something rough and useful. You take an old shirt, sew loops of grass and bark through it, creating uneven layers that flutter with the wind and mimic natural motion. You blend it into a bush, take 5 steps back and squint. It's working. And here's the ultimate trick. Don't leave sign. Stealth isn't just about what people see, it's about what you leave behind. No broken branches, no scuffed earth, no shiny boot prints in the mud. You backtrack. Brush out your trail with a pine bough. Kneel on stone instead of soil. Pick your spots like you're writing a secret message with your feet. By nightfall, you've practiced so much you startle a fox that never even noticed you. You crouch beneath a low cedar, wrapped in your patched ghillie cloak, and watch the stars blink into existence through the branches. There's a strange peace in being unseen. Not hiding, not running, just not there. You eat quietly, you sleep curled tight, body blended into the shape of the earth. No fire tonight, no scent, no light. You've become a shadow, a footnote. In a world that never stops watching, tonight you're invisible, and that just might keep you breathing. You stop walking, not because you see something, but because you don't. It's a strange stillness, almost eerie. No wind, no bird calls, just the steady thump of your heart and the distant groan of old trees shifting somewhere deep. You crouch low, press a hand to the dirt and listen, not with your ears, but with your bones. This is survival skill number 22, the sacred skill of listening. Not just hearing, not reacting, listening to the forest, to the animals, to your own ragged breath, and to the silence between it all. Out here, listening is more than a tool. It's a warning system. It's a way to see without seeing. And you've started to notice that the wilderness never shuts up. Not really. The sounds are just quieter, buried under your own noise, your boots crunching, your gear creaking, your thoughts yelling over every broken branch. But when you finally go still, really still, the forest starts to speak again. You hear the wind first. It's not just blowing, it's telling you where it's been. You learn to read its tone. A steady breeze through pine needles is different from a whisper across tall grass. The forest talks in textures. A shift in wind direction. That could mean a change in weather, or that something moved through. You learn that the wind carries scent, and if you're upwind of a predator, you're already too late. Then come the bird calls. Not the ones you hear in the movies, soaring orchestral soundtracks of cheerful chirping, but the subtle alerts, the alarm calls. You pick up on the sharp staccato bursts that signal something big is nearby. Not you, something worse. Maybe a bobcat, maybe a bear, or maybe the silence that follows when all the birds go quiet at once, like a forest-wide breath held tight. That silence is worse than a roar. It means something is watching. You shift your position and catch a new set of sounds, branches flexing under weight. Not wind, not random. The cadence is wrong. Too slow, too deliberate. It might be a moose trudging through the snow, or it might be something on two legs. You hold your breath. You listen again. Footsteps have a rhythm. Two-legged creatures move with a beat, a regular stride. Four-legged animals move with uneven steps, patter-patter pause, or thump-drag-thump. You can hear that if you're quiet. You can track that with your ears. Trained scouts could tell the difference between horse and mule just by the way hooves struck frozen ground. You're starting to understand how. You move slowly to a vantage point and pause, listening for layers. There's always something deeper than the surface sound. A distant creak, barely a whisper. A tree branch rubbing against another. The soft scratch of claws on bark. Squirrel or something bigger? You listen harder. There. It's a chewing sound. Not violent, just steady. You follow it and find a porcupine chewing on the edge of a fallen log. Harmless. But if you hadn't listened, you'd never have known. And listening isn't just for danger, it's for navigation. You can follow water by sound. You can tell how open a space is by how the sound bounces back. Wide fields echo differently than thick woods. Try walking blind through a forest. You'll notice the way sound hugs you, pushes back, or disappears into the distance. It's like sonar, but old school. Frontiersmen relied on this sense constantly. One journal describes a scout navigating an entire ridgeline at night with his ears alone, avoiding cliffs by how the wind changed pitch against the rocks. Another told of laying on the ground to hear buffalo herds from miles away. Native tribes perfected it to an art, listening not just for movement, but for intention. Is that rustle casual or stalking? You don't know yet. But the forest does. Quirky detail. Some old trappers claimed they could hear snow falling. Not landing, but actually falling, like a hiss in the air. Science says it's possible in the right conditions, when flakes are large, wet, and the air is utterly still. You test this theory during a light snowfall, head tilted, eyes closed. Maybe it's your imagination, maybe it's real. But you swear, for a second, you hear the snow. The hardest part about listening? Shutting up. You're used to filling silence, talking to yourself, humming, dragging your boots because it feels less lonely. But the forest doesn't care about your loneliness. It rewards the ones who can listen longer than they talk. So you practice. You spend entire hours without speaking, without even thinking loudly, just existing in the soundscape like one more pine needle. And then there's inner listening, the weirdest part. You start hearing your own body like it's part of the forest. Your stomach gurgles. Your breath changes pitch with your mood. Your heartbeat tells you things your brain refuses to admit. Fear sounds different than calm. Panic has a rhythm. And if you're brave enough to sit with it, to really listen, you can catch yourself before it turns into a mistake. There's a scholarly argument about whether frontiersmen were better listeners because of necessity or because of culture. Some say it was just survival instinct, learn or die. Others argue that the constant quiet of the wilderness tuned their brains differently, that they developed an acoustic intelligence, able to process patterns most modern people can't even hear. You're not sure which camp you fall into, but tonight, sitting under a low spruce with snow drifting down in lazy flakes, you hear the world differently than you did a week ago. You hear the creak of the tree you lean against, the heartbeat of the fire coals, the tiny tick of snow landing on your pack. You realize you've become something quieter, something sharper. The forest hasn't changed. You have. And you can hear it now, all of it. You're on your knees in the mud now, hunched over what you really hope is an animal track and not just a weirdly shaped puddle. You lean in, squinting. There's a split hoof imprint, partially filled with water, pointing northeast. Could be deer, could be elk, could be last week. But that's the game now. Welcome to survival skill number 23. Tracking, also known as the fine art of guessing what passed through this spot, when, and whether you should be following it, or running in the opposite direction. Tracking isn't about being some mystical forest wizard. It's about paying attention, deeply. You're not just looking for prints in the mud. You're reading the forest like a diary someone tried to erase. Every broken twig, every disturbed leaf, every bent blade of grass has a story. Your job is to stop thinking like a person and start thinking like a bloodhound with a day job. You circle the hoofprint, scanning outward. There's another one, fainter, barely there. You trace the stride in your mind, left, right, left, all pointing the same way. You press your palm against the track. The edges are soft but not crumbling. That means it's not ancient. Maybe a few hours old, maybe less. You sniff, not because you expect it to smell like venison, but because fresh earth sometimes gives away freshness faster than sight. Still damp, still recent. You start walking, but slowly. Rule number 1, don't rush a trail. You move in a gentle zigzag, always scanning ahead for sign. You're not just following tracks anymore, you're looking for patterns. A cracked branch here, a clump of fur snagged on a bramble there. You spot a tuft of coarse brown hair tangled in a low bush and pocket it. Probably deer, definitely not rabbit. You feel a small spark of satisfaction. The trail is alive. Tracking, as it turns out, isn't just about what you see, it's about what's missing. A place where the snow's been brushed away, a patch of moss flattened by weight, a single line in the dirt where a tail might have dragged. These are the invisible breadcrumbs, the whispers of movement. You remember reading about indigenous trackers who could follow a single set of prints for days, even across rocky ground. They weren't using magic. They were just tuned in, deeply aware of how nature looks when undisturbed, and how even the slightest disruption leaves a trail. They knew that a squirrel leaves a certain scratch pattern, while a fox pads silently and leaves almost nothing. They could tell when an animal was walking, trotting, fleeing, and now you try to channel that mindset. You stop asking where did it go, and start asking what was it doing. You study the spacing of the tracks, even steady, not fleeing, not alarmed. You find a small patch of urine in the snow and crouch down, warm when it hit, now frozen around the edges. That means you're close, less than an hour behind, maybe even less. You slow your breath, listen. You might see this animal before the day's over, but tracking isn't always about hunting. It's also about avoiding. You stumble across a set of prints far wider than the deer's, round, padded, 4 toes, claws visible. You freeze, a bear, probably black bear, and big. You feel a sudden drop in your stomach. You kneel beside the track and examine the depth. Fresh, heavy, but the spacing is wide. That means it was moving fast, not ambling, running. You follow the tracks cautiously and find broken branches, churned earth. The bear was charging, but not toward you. That's a comfort. Maybe it was fleeing something, maybe a spooked moose, or maybe just blowing off steam. Either way, the direction is opposite yours, so you back away slowly. Eyes up, hand on your knife. The forest might be a book, but sometimes the pages fight back. There's a quirky bit of frontier history here. Early trappers used to keep track journals, where they'd sketch different footprints and label them by species, size and behaviour. Some even made casts using clay or wax to study back at camp. You think of your own memory bank now, mental snapshots of raccoon handprints, turkey claw marks, the neat little triangles of rabbit feet, always pointed in mid-bounce. You spot a rabbit trail now, tiny parallel prints with the rear feet in front of the smaller front ones. A classic hop pattern. You smile. That one's easy. You follow it briefly and find little nuggets of scat, dry and round, fresh. Could be worth setting a snare later tonight. Tracking humans. Whole different ball game. People try to hide their trails, but they leave behind boot prints, crushed grass, campfire ash, cigarette butts if they're sloppy. You've seen it before, not often, but enough to know that people out here are usually either lost or up to something. And sometimes finding those tracks is scarier than any bear print. There's a scholarly debate about how much tracking in the old days was skill versus luck. Some argue that real frontiersmen could track anything, anywhere. Others say those stories are inflated, that most people got lost, guessed wrong and called it instinct. You think the truth, as always, is somewhere in the mud, literally. You get better at tracking the more you fail. You follow trails that go nowhere. You mistake your own prints for something else. You get turned around. And then, one day, it clicks. You stop chasing tracks and start understanding them. You continue along the deer trail, heart beating a little faster. The prints veer left toward a low ridge. You climb carefully and peek over the edge, and there it is. A doe, grazing, legs stiff, ears twitching. She doesn't see you, not yet. You crouch low, just watching. You're not here to hunt today. You're just here to know you could, that you followed, not stumbled, that you read the signs, not guessed. You back away slowly, leaving no sound behind. The forest writes everything down. You've finally learned how to read it. You're standing in front of a fallen pine, one of those big old titans that finally gave up after a hard wind and 100 years of quiet creaking. Its roots are torn up like a giant hand yanked them from the soil, and the base is thick enough you couldn't wrap your arms halfway around it. You press a hand to the rough bark, already picturing it as firewood, as shelter, as tools, as, well, everything. Because this is survival skill number 24, woodcraft. Not just using wood, but understanding it, its textures, its timing, its moods. How to live with it, work with it, and turn it into everything from furniture to fire. Most folks think of wood as just something to burn, and sure, you'll burn plenty, but you quickly learn that not all wood burns equally, and some of it fights back. Take pine, for instance. It's got sap for days. Great for fire starting if you use fat wood, but toss a green log on the fire and it'll spit and crackle like it's insulted. Meanwhile, birch burns hot and fast, even when wet, thanks to that papery bark that catches flame like dry leaves. And oak? Oak is the long game. Dense, heavy, stubborn. But once it's seasoned, it burns slow and warm, the kind of fire that lasts through the night and feels like a hug from inside your bones. You start chopping the fallen pine with your hatchet, working through the outer limbs first. It's all about leverage and angles. If you swing straight down, you're wasting energy. So you go at it diagonally, V-notches, carving out chunks and letting gravity do the work. The trick isn't brute strength, it's rhythm. Chop, twist, pry. Chop, twist, pry. You sweat fast, even in the cold. You gather the smaller branches first, fuel for cooking fires, kindling bundles, frame poles. Then you move to shaping. With your belt knife, you whittle down a branch into a pot hook, curved and carved with notches to hang over your fire. You carve a spoon next, because eating with a stick works, but eventually you crave a little dignity. Each curl of wood peels away like you're uncovering the object already hidden inside. That's the real heart of woodcraft, seeing what it wants to be. Later you take a thicker log and split it down with a baton, a chunk of hardwood used to hammer your knife through the grain. It's slow going, but it gives you clean, flat boards. You line them up and lash them into a crude bench. Not necessary, but now you can sit by the fire like a person, instead of squatting in the dirt like a cave goblin. Frontiersmen used wood for everything. Spoons, bowls, plates, tent poles, walking sticks, traps, snowshoes, sleds. A man with a knife and a tree could build a whole kitchen. Some even carved dugout canoes, burning and scraping out tree trunks until they floated, sometimes better than anything factory made. They didn't just see wood as fuel, they saw it as infrastructure. And then there's the bow drill. You've been meaning to try it, so today you do. You carve a spindle, a fireboard, and a handhold. Your bow is a bent branch strung with cordage from your earlier rope making. You kneel, place the spindle in the notch, wrap the bow, and start spinning. Back and forth, until smoke curls from the notch and your arms are shaking like twigs. It doesn't catch, not the first time, or the second. But on the third try, a coal smoulders in the dust. You cradle it in a nest of dry tinder, blow gently, and feel the miracle as flame rises. You sit back, grinning like a lunatic. The fire didn't just happen. You made it, from scratch, from tree, and effort and air. There's something oddly emotional about working with wood. Every piece tells a story. The knot in a pine branch that refuses to split. The soft whisper of a birch curl falling to the ground. The way cedar smells like old memories and new hope. You find yourself listening to the wood as you work, not in some mystical way, but in the way that your hands start to know the pressure, the grain, the texture, before your eyes do. Quirky frontier fact: some old trappers used to carve totems into trees along their trails. Faces, symbols, even crude maps. Not for religion necessarily, but as navigation aids and personal markers. A bent pine might mean a cache nearby. A carved bear face could warn of danger. Over time, certain woodsmen had entire symbolic languages etched into the forest. There's debate among historians about how much woodcraft was common knowledge. Some say most settlers barely knew how to start a fire without matches. Others insist they were all part-time carpenters by necessity. Reality likely falls somewhere in the middle. Those who lasted had to learn. Whether by desperation or mentorship, they became artisans out of survival. You, now, are joining that tradition. You've got a spoon, a bench, a fire you made with a stick, and hope. You've split and stacked enough firewood to last the night. You've whittled traps, carved cord toggles, reinforced your pack frame with a bit of curved birch that fits perfectly across the shoulders. And you did it all with the same blade you've been carrying since day one. That's the magic of wood. It gives and gives, if you treat it with patience. Rush, and it'll split wrong, snap, resist. Respect it, and it becomes shelter, tool, heat, comfort. It becomes home. The sun's dipping now, painting the trees gold. You sit on your lopsided bench, stirring soup with your handmade spoon, fire crackling low. Everything around you started as just trees. Now it's yours. You wake before dawn, not because you want to, but because something ancient inside you decided it's time. The stars are still out, blinking faintly through a thinning veil of clouds, and the world is quiet in that thick, pregnant way that only happens right before light returns. You stretch under your cloak, feeling every ache, every crack in your spine like the settling of an old cabin. And as you rise and brush frost from your shoulders, you realize this is your last full day out here, your last night of smoke in your clothes and dirt under your nails. So today's skill, number 25, is less about action and more about understanding. It's frontier self-reliance. The ability to look around, see only forest and sky and stone and still say, yeah, I've got this. You start the day by checking your snares, because routines matter. One is sprung and empty. Another has a small snowshoe hare, its body still and curled. You say your usual words of thanks, quick and quiet. You've stopped apologizing to the forest. It doesn't want your guilt, it wants your humility. You reset the loop, tuck the rabbit into your pouch, and head back to camp. This camp, your 6th, 7th, is actually starting to feel like yours. Not a place you're squatting in, not a random patch of wilderness, but a space you've shaped. There's the fire pit you dug by hand, the sleeping nook built into a windbreak of logs and pine boughs, the cache you buried under that flat stone, even the tree branch you carved into a kind of hook to hang your gear. Useless in any other context, but essential here. You skin the rabbit by instinct now, your hands moving while your mind drifts. Not too long ago, this would have taken you 20 minutes and most of your sanity. Now it's 5 minutes and a rinse in the creek. You're not proud of it. You're just practiced. You boil the meat with some dried roots you foraged 3 days ago. Flavor? Questionable. Nutrition? Enough. And as the steam rises, your brain starts inventorying. What you've made, what you've learned, what you'll need if you ever come out here again. It's more than gear. It's the knowledge that's piled up in you like firewood. You know how to start a fire in rain. You know which trees bleed flammable sap and which won't burn for anything. You know how to make cordage and what mushrooms won't kill you. You can read tracks like they're subtitles for the forest. You know how to keep your scent downwind, how to fish with thorn hooks, how to not go completely insane after 5 straight days of nothing but your own thoughts and squirrel drama. But deeper than all that is something harder to name. It's not arrogance, it's not survivalist bravado. It's more like a settling, a recalibration. You used to think of comfort as soft things. Pillows, heat, clean socks. Now comfort is knowing what to do when things go sideways, when the pack tears, when the fire goes out in the snow, when the only food left is you and a forest full of problems. That's self-reliance. And the frontier didn't give it to you easy. Historically, frontier self-reliance was romanticised, a man alone with his rifle and grit. But that's only half the story. Most didn't survive long without some help, be it indigenous knowledge, trapping partners, or sheer dumb luck. What's real is the skill stack that made self-reliance possible. Tool-making, medicine, firecraft, navigation, food preservation, even diplomacy. The truly self-reliant weren't lone wolves. They were polymaths in buckskin, quietly fixing every problem that tried to kill them. You've picked up pieces of that now. Sure, you're not stitching moccasins from deer hide or brewing spruce salve for wounds. Yet. But you've got the bones of it. And more importantly, you know you can figure it out. That was always the secret. Not knowing everything, but knowing that you could learn. Quirky historical fact. Some old trappers carried tiny books, leather-bound survival guides no bigger than a palm. They'd scribble notes in the margins, tips, recipes, sometimes just quotes to keep them sane. One journal found in a cave decades later had just one phrase repeated on 10 pages. Still here, still me, still fine. That's a level of rugged poetry you aspire to. You spend the rest of the day tightening up camp, not because you need to, but because it's what a person does when they belong somewhere. You lash your firewood into a tidy stack, you fix a loose cord on your pack, you scrape your knife blade clean, rub it with fat to keep rust off, you refill your water, and when all that's done, you carve a small symbol into the bark of a tree behind your lean-to. Nothing showy, just a mark that says, I was here, I made it. As night falls, you light your fire, not high, just enough to warm the rabbit stew. You sit on your carved bench, legs stretched, cloak pulled close. Above, the stars sharpen into bright silver, unblurred by street lamps or car exhaust or anything remotely modern. You sip your food, you breathe. The fire crackles. The forest doesn't mind you anymore. There's a strange sadness wrapped in the pride tonight. You'll leave soon. Go back to a world that doesn't smell like pine smoke and wet leather, where food comes in packages and nobody talks about wind direction unless it's allergy season. You'll clean up, plug back in, scroll through a screen while forgetting how quiet the trees can be. But some part of you will stay out here, or maybe, better yet, bring the forest back with you. Because now you know what to do when things fall apart. Not just out here, but anywhere. That's what self-reliance means. You finish your stew, bank the fire, and lean back into the dark. The woods don't scare you anymore. You belong here, and you always did. You wake to a forest soaked in gold. The sun filters through the trees in soft, shifting rays, like someone is slowly peeling back the darkness. The air is still, and for the first time in what feels like forever, you are still too. No fire to stoke, no trapline to check, no frostbitten fingers demanding attention. Just the simple, quiet truth of a morning where you've already done enough. This is the end, but not in the dramatic, cinematic way. It's quieter than that. There's no crowd cheering you home, no credits rolling across the treetops, just your pack, your boots, and the weight of everything you've learned hanging comfortably on your shoulders. You take your time breaking camp, not because you're lazy, but because you've finally figured out how to move with intention. Every cord untied, every knot undone, every coal scattered into the earth, it's all done with the kind of quiet reverence that only comes from living through discomfort and finding meaning in it. You erase your presence, not because you weren't here, but because the best kind of survival leaves no scars. Before you leave, you check your cache one last time, right where you left it, dry, intact, waiting for a future version of you, or maybe for someone else. You smile. Not all gifts need to be unwrapped by the person who hides them. Then you turn toward the invisible path, the one that leads back to where things are easier. Lighter, louder. You don't rush. You walk with the kind of steady, unshakable pace that only comes from surviving something. Really surviving it. Not by luck, but by effort, by skill, by paying attention and growing in all the ugly, useful ways people used to grow before Google. Every step forward is a step away from the fire pit, from the handmade bench, from the dirt that still holds the shape of your body. But it's also a step toward everything else. Hot showers, real beds, clean clothes. And you know what? You'll appreciate those things now. Maybe for the first time in years, but more than that, you'll appreciate yourself. The version of you that knelt in snow, chewed on cattail root, boiled pine needles, and made cordage from bark. The version that crouched in silence for hours just to learn how the forest sounds when it isn't scared of you anymore. And even when you're home again, warm, full, clean, you'll still hear it. The crackle of coals, the whistle of wind through spruce, the heartbeat of the woods under your feet. You'll still know. And once you know, you don't forget. So sleep now. Close your eyes, stretch your toes, and let your breath slow. You've earned it. You made it out. You made it through. And if you ever need to do it again, well, you'll remember how.